everybody, today we are debating creation versus evolution, and we are starting right now. Ladies and gentlemen, thrilled to have you here for another epic debate. This is going to be a fun one, folks, as today we are debating a classic on this channel, creation versus evolution. And want to say if it's your first time here, consider hitting that subscribe button, as we have many more debates to come. So for example, this coming Wednesday, we are very excited as Sal will be debating against Dan, a professor in biology, and Erica will be co-moderating with me. So that should be exciting, and the thumbnail is there in the bottom right corner of your screen for that. Well, want to let you know as well, no matter what side you are on all of these issues, we have debates on science, religion, politics, and all of the other controversies out there. We want to let you know, no matter what walk of life you're from, we really do hope you feel welcome. And with that, let's get into the details of today's debate. Very excited, as today it's going to be a tag team debate. Each side will get a roughly 12 to 15 minutes split, where they'll get to make their case at the front, and then we'll go into open conversation followed by Q&A. If you happen to have a question, feel free to fire it into the old live chat, and if you tag me with @ModernDayDebate, it makes it easier for me to get every single question in that Q&A list. Super chat is also an option, in which case you can make not only a question for one of the speakers during the Q&A, but also a comment. And, of course, they would get a chance to respond, and we ask that you be your regular friendly selves, whether it be a question or a comment. And last thing before we get rolling here, want to mention all of the speakers I have linked in the description. So that way, if you're listening, folks, and you're like, I like that, I want more, you can hear plenty more by clicking on those links. With that, we are going to get started as our special creation team is going to get the ball rolling. So, want to say first though, before we officially start, thank you all we really appreciate all of you guys being here, standing for truth, as well as, I think, in case someone turned off their camera, if you're able to turn it back on, just because it scrambles the picture on me if you turn it off, let's see, we have, let me see what I'm going to readjust it here, give me 2 seconds. So, as you see, from left to right, you see standing for truth, as well as, I'm going to move John back into his spot, and then J.L. Warren, who is stepping in today for Fight the Flat Earth. We hope Fight the Flat Earth feels better, as he's not feeling too hot today. And want to say, standing for truth, and John, and team, and J.L. Warren, thanks for being here, all four of you gentlemen.
Thank you for having us. My pleasure, James. Always a great time.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll let you get the ball rolling, standing for truth, and John.
John, go ahead, brother.
Right up. Appreciate you guys coming out for this. James, I need to share a doc with you.
Gotcha.
All right, let me know when that's coming through.
Absolutely. It's clear as day.
All right. All right, everybody, thanks so much for coming out for this very interesting conversation on creation versus evolution. Now, obviously, this debate will go in many directions, but before we even get to the fallacies of Darwinism, we must address what I argue makes the entire premise of evolution fruit of a poison tree, and that is abiogenesis through chemical evolution. And my opponents will likely argue that it was much simpler than what we view today as life, and they may even attempt to explain away the improbabilities by saying life exists, therefore the probability is 1. However, let us consider if their explanation for the prerequisites needed for the theory they stake their lives on, if it is a remotely plausible for it to have occurred in an undirected manner, or if in order for the probability to be 1, the rational conclusion is an intelligent agent. Even if simpler parts somehow came into existence, this does not circumvent the requirement for a minimum number of these parts to all exist at the same time in a specific location. Now, while atheists and their origin of life researchers try to avoid this conundrum, it is just that, unavoidable. My event of special creation requires an intelligent agent. Theirs is nothing but chance and deep time. So let's consider what is recognized as the simplest form of life and how its simpleness by comparison to other forms of life does not actually mean it is simple. The Mycoplasma genitalium has a genome of 580,000 base pairs. This astonishing number enables it to contain 470 genes that code for 470 proteins with an average of 347 amino acids per protein. The odds against just one such protein of that length are 1 in 10 to the 450th power. If we calculate the entire genome, then the odds are 1 in 20 to the 164,090th power. And this is without accounting for the increased improbability when you consider that nature had to select only left-handed amino acids and bifunctional ones. All of this before considering that these genes must have been in existence at the same time, in the same location, on a prebiotic Earth in an environment that is admitted to be less advantageous for the required chemical reactions to occur. Now, to put this in context, the total number of particles in the entire universe is 10 to the 80th power, and the total number of interactions by those particles in the history of the universe is 10 to the 143rd. So all of this is before considering the origin of the genetic code, the assignment of arbitrary values to codons to equal amino acids, and the requirement of DNA and transcription proteins and translation proteins to exist simultaneously, even for basic replication to occur. Now I must address neo-Darwinism directly. Here are 4 positions which challenge the premise of undirected evolution through natural selection being a logical, plausible, or probable conclusion for our existence. First, adaptation of existing functions to account for environmental condition variance is primarily executed through epigenetic factors or activation of recessive genes, neither of which result in new core functions. These realizations have shaken the entire premise of evolution to its core. Not only are these adaptations the result of variable gene expression, they are not the result of mutations, rather are controlled modifications executed through read, write, and erase nanomachines. Second, the variation of transcription factors and gene regulatory networks results in a significant difference in gene expression. To date, the most studied of these are in relation to cognitive function and show 9 to 23% of variation between chimps and humans, for example. It has also been shown that these differences must work in unison, and any degradation of this even to the level of point mutation results in cascade effects, which result in dramatic impairment or death. Not only does this showcase the extreme importance of gene regulation, it also decimates the relevance of similar coding genes in relation to final outcome. Moreover, the significant differences in non-coding regions of the genome become apparent for things ranging from introns, retrotransposons, enhancers, and promoters, to name a few, almost all of which have been dismissed by those against intelligent design. However, the discoveries made in the last decade have now made their relevance unavoidable. Third, it has now become apparent through structural biology that not only is the prescriptive sequence information housed in the genetic code required, it must also be geographically coordinated through dynamic real-time folding to enable gene expression. This applies to interchromosomal data transfer and gene regulation, which not only forces acceptance of physical gene locations being vital, it also decimates the relevance of similar sequences existing in another organism, but housed in completely different physical locations. Not only does this make the sequence similarities irrelevant in relation to undirected natural selection, it also lends credence to intelligent design. Fourth, the prescriptive information in our genetic code uses arbitrary values, the meaning of which is unknown without a translation mechanism. This semantic meaning is immaterial, and in no other context can be interpreted without the prior actions of an intelligent agent. Not only must my opponents explain its origin, they must also account for the subset code base with dual syntax for translational pausing, which is vital for protein synthesis. Therefore, not only does our genetic code provide translation templates and translation and transcription templates, it also enables time variable base expression. As this is considered in relation to both abiogenesis and the previous arguments, the now unavoidable reality is that our genetic code is a 4-dimensional programming code base unlike anything humans have ever conceived. When all this is viewed through the now known reality that not only must the information exist, it must also be in a specific physical location in the genome, to conclude that foreknowledge of the desired outcome is not required for life to exist, requires those who dismiss intelligent agents to suspend all rational thought. This leads me to a simple question for my audience and for the opponents. If I asked you about the development requirements for any piece of technology that contains coding, logic gates, programming, nanomachines, and exhibits temporal controls which defy simple cause and effect outcomes, before even accounting for the physical structures required for the execution to begin in a specific place at a specific time. It insisted they'd all come into being without an intelligent agent being required. Would you think I was exhibiting rational thought or could even be taken seriously? I think not. Therefore, it is my position that the existence of life by an undirected physical process without the action of an intelligent agent is not only neither logical, plausible, or probable, but impossible. As you consider these arguments and expansion of them throughout the debate, ask yourself this question: whose position is more rational? Is it those who conclude it is more logical, plausible, and probable that these things cannot occur by chance? Or those who argue, no matter how counterintuitive it is, you must believe this could all happen without a designer being required?
Awesome. Thanks so much there, James. Let me get my presentation here. Thank you, John. Let's get it all set up here. So it looks like John went just at the 7-minute mark. This shouldn't take me any more than 7 minutes. So I'll set my timer here. Actually, before I do, thanks so much for doing this debate, guys. Looking forward to this. Thanks so much for filling in there, JL. I think this is going to be a good, profitable, and respectful dialogue. So let's not waste any time here. I've got about 7 minutes, so let's get started. Okay, which model is stronger, creation or evolution? The answer to this question will come down to who is making the best testable predictions. This is gold standard in science, of course. Creationists are the ones making testable predictions on DNA function, mutation rates, speciation rates, and more. Let us get right into the model. God said, be fruitful and multiply, not be fruitful and clone yourselves. And so what makes the most sense, both scientifically and theologically, is that God created DNA differences from the start. This is the idea of created heterozygosity. Adam and Eve would have had within their DNA the genetic potential to produce every shade of skin that exists on this planet. Time is not required for the diversity today because diversity can be designed and built into Adam and Eve. This idea of front-loaded DNA differences applies universally across the biblical kinds. A direct prediction of this model has to do with the rate as to when new species form. Predictions are already coming true. Let us use birds as an example. There are approximately 10 to 12,000 bird species alive on the planet today. If all bird species today descend from a handful of bird kinds on the ark, this would predict that roughly 2 to 3 new bird species would be forming per year for 4,500 years. Now, evolutionists would have us believe that birds today descend from theropod dinosaurs roughly 35 to 65 million years ago. The speciation rate predictions between creation and evolution are significantly different. New species of bird have been documented in real time, as you can see here, with a new species of finch observed on the Galapagos Island. This was after these predictions were made. The resulting species were due to shifts in heterozygosity to homozygosity, and once again, just as predicted. Why are there so few bird species if deep time evolution is true? Why are there only 10 to 12,000 bird species today when evolution were true? We should be seeing hundreds of thousands of bird species. This goes for all sorts of species, as you can see here: lizards, reptiles, bats, rabbits. I've got all the sources here. How do our opponents today address these problems? How do the evolutionists here today deal with the new genetic boundary study that concluded roughly 90% of all animal life was roughly the same very recent age? I want them to answer this question. Here's a confirmed prediction based on the Y chromosome. The Y chromosome only goes back 4,500 years to Y chromosome Noah, and genetic stamps on the history of civilization have been detected. We've got the 3 major haplogroups found in our mitochondrial DNA that confirms the existence of Noah's 3 daughters-in-law. How do they address these problems? Let me strongly emphasize the fact that the absolute best evidence for evolution has been overturned, and it is now in favor of the creation model of ancestry. The entire junk DNA paradigm has been overturned. The chromosome 2 fusion has been overturned. The alleged site where the fusion supposedly took place actually represents a highly organized and functional gene. The area is far too degenerate, and there's a lack of evidence for the so-called cryptic centromere. How do our opponents here today address these problems? How about homology? Well, we know that human engineers design in homologous patterns. Across the globe, we see shared designs and even shared blueprints. What about the so-called existence of transitional forms? Well, think of a military vehicle that blends the features of both a land vehicle and a vehicle built for the ocean, for example, an amphibious assault vehicle. Creationists too predict interesting mosaics. Nested hierarchies, as is shown here, are simply characteristics of design and reflective of God's hierarchical nature. Lastly, the best examples of evolutionary change are either reductive, degrading to the function of the organism, or simply general organismal adaptation or epigenetic. There are no examples that our opponents here can present of evolutionary change, the type that is necessary to take their fish to fishermen. Mutations are detrimental to life, and natural selection is a fine-tuning mechanism that keeps a species as strong as it can be. Dr. Nathaniel Jensen has made incredibly specific predictions on mutation rates, including mutation rates in African people groups not yet known. Molecular clock studies, as you can see here, confirm Adam and Eve and biblical creation. Evolutionists look to time dependency to explain away the data. If our opponents here today disagree with the Eve date derived from straightforward mitochondrial DNA coalescence equations, they need to make testable predictions. When does the molecular clock speed up and slow down? Maybe they can answer this question at the start of the discussion portion. Another major prediction of this model of biblical ancestry involves DNA function. We would predict that the vast majority of DNA and DNA elements are functional, while evolutionists assume much of our genome is evolutionary leftovers or junk. We have preliminary evidence for genome-wide functionality. ENCODE has revealed that over 80% of our genome is actively transcribed into RNA, suggesting function. Dan Grahr is the one who said, if ENCODE is right, evolution is wrong. Can the evolutionists refute this? As you can see here from these numbers of papers, we know that ERVs and other classes of retrotransposons and ALUs, for example, accomplish many crucial functions in regulating gene expression. They help determine cell types, they help with development, and even assist in cell stress responses. Here's a fascinating paper that goes over intronic ALUs influencing alternative splicing. This is exactly what we would predict. A genome of functional DNA elements, created DNA units of function. What about functional orphan genes that show independent ancestries? How do they explain this incredible class of taxonomically restricted and essential genes? These orphan genes defy universal ancestry. These genes are unique sets of coding sequences that are specific to particular organisms, and they show no consistent hierarchy. Maybe our opponents can start off the discussion by answering this question, or really any one of these extremely important questions. I have a minute here, so I'm almost done. A couple more questions I would love to see answered in the discussion portion. How do they explain the incredible dissimilarity between chimp and human Y chromosomes? How do they explain the low genetic diversity in human beings? Genesis tells us God created two human beings, Adam and Eve. This would severely restrict genetic diversity. And this happens to be exactly what we find. Evolutionists were shocked by this, which is why they had to post hoc, ad hoc invent their fairy tale out of Africa population bottleneck. Is this out of Africa bottleneck even remotely feasible? We can discuss that in the discussion portion, of course. Everything we see today points to the death and destruction of a once perfect creation. This includes our genome. What type of selection can be presented that will select away so many deleterious mutations that are pouring into our genetics and degenerating our information systems? We are devolving and not getting better. No forward evolution is observed. Most mutations are unselectable and invisible to selection. And artificially contrived rescue mechanisms such as synergistic epistasis and mutation count mechanism have been falsified. Can our opponents today answer any of these questions? We shall see. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Standing. We'll switch it over. So we will kick it over to our skeptical friends, or you could say skeptical of creation, but proponents of evolution. And the floor is all yours. Thanks for being here, guys.
Yeah, you're going to be, I'm going to be presenting the evidence today for our side. As we already discussed, hold on one second, let me adjust my mic. As we've already discussed, Fight the Flat Earth couldn't make it today, and J.L. Warren is filling in for him, so it'd be unfair to ask J.L. Warren to present anything for today's presentation. So give me 1 second. I'm going to be answering a lot of those questions you asked already. Most of them will be answered in my presentation. And I'm ready to start when you are, James.
Absolutely. Ready for you.
Okay. So you can give me 1 second to get my presentation up, and I'll tell you when to share my screen. Oh, I guess you're sharing my screen right now, right?
Not yet.
And
I
is it-
can when you want.
Oh yeah, okay. I'll let you know when I'm ready. But you can go ahead and put me on screen, and I'll be able to switch over when I'm ready. All right. So hey guys, thanks for joining us today to speak about evolution. Today we intend to provide 3 pieces of evidence that do support the modern theory of evolution. We will be doing this by with 2 of these pieces of evidence will come in the form of ERVs. He specifically mentioned ERVs. It's great that we're having this conversation because ERVs are undeniable proof that evolution and natural selection is in fact true. Specifically, the locations of shared ERVs with chimps in the human genome, and the ratio of the LTR discontinuity of ERVs, and the correlation between the two as predicted by the accepted model of evolutionary theory. And finally, we will have a look at chromosome 2, which you also happen to bring up, of the human genome and speak on its origins. But before we begin, I think with this being an evolution debate, it's only proper that we actually define evolution. Evolution is the mechanism that is responsible for the diversity of life on Earth through natural selection. This is due to the procreation process in life not being 100% efficient. As genes are copied relentlessly in our bodies, slight mistakes or mutations can occur and, given enough time, are responsible for all life on Earth. So let's talk about retroviruses and ERVs. A retrovirus like HIV is an RNA virus. This is key, guys. It's an RNA virus, not a DNA virus. Normally, a retrovirus infects a host cell and hijacks its internal mechanisms to create more copies of itself, effectively killing the host cell and spreading its RNA to other cells. Every so often, a retrovirus can infect a sperm or egg cell, though. This results in the virus becoming inactive. However, the viral RNA, which is converted to DNA, will become part of the host cell's genome and will be passed on to future generations. Why ERVs are so important to evolution is because they offer us definitive markers in our genes and can help us identify common ancestors in a nested hierarchy. And more importantly, they can test the predictions made by our current model of evolution. But before we get into the evidence, we must first prove that ERVs are indeed viral in nature. And this goes to answer one of your questions, one of your suppositions that you put out earlier. So this is easy. All ERVs consist of several RNA viral specific genes. This means that without these genes, the RNA is not functional. Okay, it can't, without certain of these genes, you can't transcribe the RNA into DNA. And then you also can't protect the RNA virus so that it can spread from one cell to another. All right. These genes are the GAG genes, the POL genes, and the ENV genes. All right. The GAG gene's sole purpose is to produce the nucleocapsid that protects the RNA virus. The POL gene codes for reverse transcriptase, and the ENV gene allows the virus to produce glycoproteins, which allow the viral cell to pass through a future host cell membrane. All 3 of these genes are specific and unique to retroviruses. The second way we know these are viral in nature are due to the discontinuity of LTR to LTR sites, or long terminal repeats that connect the viral DNA to the host DNA using integrase. Now that we know generally what an ERV is, let's discuss the 2 independent ways it validates the standard model of evolution. First is location of the ERV in the genome. I'm sure most of you have probably heard that 96% of the human genome is identical and shared with a chimpanzee. I don't think this actually sets into most people, and I'm going to share a screen right here that's going to highlight the similarities between the human and chimp genome. Now, these are the human and chimp DNA strands, or not the genome strands, genetic material strands set next to each other, side by side. On each column has 2 strands. You can barely tell because they're so similar. If you're not really getting close into the screen or making it bigger, you can't even, in some parts, you wouldn't even be able to tell that there are actually 2 different lines there. That's how similar they are. Now, on the left of each of those lines is the human DNA. On the right is the chimpanzee. Okay, or the chromosomes, I'm sorry. The chromosomes for the human, on the right are the chromosomes for the chimpanzee. As you can see, they all line up. But there's also something else that's important about this. Okay, give me 1 second to get back to my notes. All right, so this graphic, of course, it shows that these 2 are lined up, but there's also something that you need to notice. On the short arm of chromosome 10, we find something interesting. what's called an ERV, or the fossil of an old retrovirus. Another interesting find is that not only do both humans and chimpanzees share the genetic markers for this particular ERV, but the markers are in the exact same position on both the human and chimpanzee genome. Now, that alone might not seem too impressive. You know, he threw out a bunch of big numbers, just coming up with them and saying, hey, these are real numbers, right? Well, let's talk about some real numbers. There are over 500 nucleotides and over 100,000 base pairs on those nucleotides. This gives, at minimum, a 1 in 50 million chance that two identical ERVs place themselves in identical spots on two separate species chromosomes. 1 in 50 million. Now, that's a lot, but the odds of winning the lottery are much lower than that. And people win the lottery all the time. Now let's head over to chromosome 1. Again, on the short arm, we find evidence of another ERV. And again, when comparing to the chimp data, we find the exact ERV in the exact location. The probability of finding this ERV in the exact location is the exact same as finding the first one, 1 in 50 million. To find both of them would have to be 1 in over 2.5 times 10 to the 15, or a really small number. Now that's 2 of them. And these are just 2 of the 14 plus K-class ERVs that are shared between chimps and humans. 1 class of ERVs, and we're already reaching numbers that would way surpass whatever number you made up. Now, these don't include W-class ERVs or any of the other ERVs, because there's multiple types of ERVs that are shared between humans and other species. All right, so the probability that this is by random luck alone is just too low to be statistically significant. The second strong piece of evidence involving ERVs is the LTR to LTR ratio of discontinuity in ERVs. Due to the nature of how a retrovirus inserts itself into a host genome, the 2 LTR sites are identical. After insertion, however, any genetic mutations that occur on one LTR site will be unique from the other. And this discontinuity between LTR sites gets passed down from generation to generation and species to species. So I've basically explained ERVs, but I have yet to really tie down their exclusivity to the evolution model. While I did point out the absurdity that the observation of unique ERVs identical to chimps is completely due to chance, ERVs offer something much more useful to the explanation of the diversity of species. Let's say we have a species who has ERV1 in its DNA. It would stand to reason that if evolution were true, then only descendants of that species should ever have the ERV1. Now let's say that species splits into 2 species, species 1A and species 1B. Let's also say that species 1A contracts a second retrovirus, and we're going to call this one ERV2. It would stand to reason that the offspring of all future descendants of species 1A will have both ERVs 1 and 2, while all descendants of species 1B will only have retrovirus ERV1. If this mechanism, it's this mechanism that helps us design independent nested hierarchies that at all levels appear to be consistent with the nested hierarchies established well before the science of genetics was born. As far as LTR to LTR discontinuity, as previously stated, the LTR sites are identical at the original insertion of the retroviral DNA into the host genome. And given time, random mutations will occur at one LTR site that is not present at the other LTR site. Given more and more time, more and more discontinuity should occur between each LTR site of an individual ERV. These 2 pieces of evidence, because they give the model of evolution, through natural selection falsifiability, give the model of evolution through natural. Because these I'm reading from a script right now. They're great pieces of evidence because they give the model of evolution through natural selection falsifiability. Because these pieces of evidence make predictions which we can test today using modern technology. Now, I do want to keep in mind something. The original tree of life, was well before the discovery of genetics and DNA. So the fact that the data coming out from new science is consistent with the predictions made from old science stands as a strong indicator that the old science was indeed right as well. Let's see, one instance of this violation, or I'm sorry, the first prediction is this. If ERVs are genetically passed on to only future offspring of a previously infected species, then finding a common ERV in a species that does not share a common ancestor, while not finding that same ERV in a species that has a more recent common ancestor, would violate that. One instance of this, in fact, would destroy the evolutionary model. That's all you have to do. Prove me wrong. Find one ERV that I do not find in a common ancestor that I do find in something that we don't share a common ancestor with, that, you know, based on time, because we all have one common ancestor. So based on time, you find a violation of this, and you should be able to violate the evolutionary model. The second prediction made is that of LTR to LTR discontinuity. Since the ratio of discontinuity is a function of time, ERVs that are inserted into common ancestors much further back in our history will have a greater LTR to LTR discontinuity ratio than ERVs that are much more recent. And according to Dangle, in a paper published in 1995, the degree of LTR to LTR discontinuity is proportional to the degree of taxonomic separation of the species that share the ERV. Now, what really defines this evidence to be a killer is that both of these predictions are made by an independent mechanism. The ERV insertion location is completely independent of the random mutations at the LTR sites. Yet both of these events can be predicted by the understanding of speciation through natural selection and verified with modern technology. The key point to take away from these two pieces of evidence is that random chance alone cannot explain these observations, while the mechanisms of evolution perfectly predict them. The third and probably most damaging piece of evidence against creationism or anti-evolutionism is the second chromosome of the human body. See, humans have 46 chromosomes, 23 from mom, 23 from dad. A couple of creationists, may have an extra one, but that's besides the point. The three primates that most closely relate to humans all have 48 chromosomes. Now, if the model of evolution and nested hierarchies are to be correct, then this missing chromosome needs to be explained. It could not have just been lost, as that would have been lethal to our species, leaving us with just two possibilities. Either our common ancestor had 46 chromosomes and the others gained 2 chromosomes, or the most likely option was that we originally had 48 chromosomes due to the fact that the other 3 primates have 48 chromosomes, and the human lineage lost 2 as a result of some other mechanism. In this case, it would be fused chromosomes. All right, so we actually have 48 chromosomes, or there's 48 chimp chromosomes in us, but 2 of them are fused together to give us 46 total. Now, this explanation cannot be regarded as nothing more than this explanation can be regarded as nothing more than an ad hoc explanation to fill in the gaps. I'm sure creationists surely shouldn't have a problem with that, since God of the gaps is essentially their entire argument. But in the interest of intellectual honesty and integrity, I will posit that if this observation cannot be scientifically explained and backed with evidence, then evolution is wrong. Bottom line. And sure enough, scientists were able to prove that the human chromosome 2 has telomeres and centromeres where they do not belong, suggesting that the the 2 chromosomes fuse together to form one. Now, not only did they find the individual human chromosome that this took place in, being chromosome 2, but they could also identify which chimpanzee chromosome was the one that it fused with, chromosome 13, resulting in the human lineage losing a chromosome pair and passing that on to future generations. Creationists currently have no explanation at all for the fusing of this chromosome and the genetic passing of these mutations on to their offspring, while the evolutionary model perfectly and eloquently describes and predicts these events. In conclusion, the location-specific ERVs that are shared through common ancestry, the ratio of discontinuity of LTR sites is a function of time, and human chromosome 2 are all strong and irrefutable pieces of evidence to suggest that the model of speciation through natural selection is in fact correct. And the creationist explanation of the diversity of life is nothing more than a fairy tale.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. Appreciate that. We will kick it back into the main screen. So, JL, if you have anything to add, we can kick the mic over to you. Otherwise, we will get going on the open discussion.
Actually, team presented the excellent evidence, and it's exactly where I would have stood. So I'm ready to go when you guys are.
You bet.
Awesome.
All right, floor is yours, guys.
Okay, I think I'll start here. I appreciate that opening, Team Skeptic. That was well done. You touched on some of my favorite topics, so I think this is going to be a really good discussion. I'm sure it's going to fly by. Nested hierarchies, chromosome 2 fusion, endogenous retroviruses, for example. I'll give a quick rebuttal and then I'll follow it up with a question. So as I kind of pointed out in my opening, nested hierarchies in general, say in DNA anatomy and physiology, are also expected by creationists based on the design model. Therefore, when it comes to the endogenous retroviruses and the retrotransposons, the question we need to ask ourselves is, what are retrotransposons? Are they really the leftover remnants of viral infections in our DNA? And I know you pointed to the POL gene, the GAG, the ENV, for example. So they do have similarities to RNA viruses, of course, but evolutionists, they've assumed the former. And this is because, as you've pointed out, and I agree, they bear strong similarities to actual viruses. So that would actually predict that these sequences are, for the most part, non-functional evolutionary leftovers. But according to our model...
Hold on. Can I ask you a question before you move on to the next part? Because I do have a question about that specific topic. What would be the function of the POL and the GAG gene before... if they were not viral in nature?
Well,
Let's say
I
they
can
were just
directly answer
junk
that
DNA.
on the GAG gene. For retrotransposons, it actually acts as a security passcode to get it to move into new locations through portals and such. It's well documented in different uses of the GAG gene. So I'm not really sure what your point is on that.
Can you give me
demonstratable?
Can you give me a notation on that? I do have notations for everything.
Actually, if I could jump in real quick, I put about 12 technical papers in my opening suggesting that these endogenous retroviruses and the other classes of retrotransposons accomplish many crucial functions, and just to name a few of, and I can screen share the papers again, but for example, regulating gene expression, differentiation, and development. And what's fascinating actually is many of these retrotransposons, they have the start sequence for many different genes, especially genes in the brain. So these jumping genes, they can actually jump around the genome, turning on and off genes performing functional roles. So my question to you, and you can take as much time as you need to answer it, would you have a technical paper, a peer-reviewed technical paper that can show any one of these classes of retrotransposons, including the endogenous retroviruses, going from non-functional to something extremely functional in our genome, for example, in determining cell types and the number of other functional roles? Because that's what we would predict, that they are functional DNA elements, and that's exactly what we find to be true. Take your time to answer it, and I'll screen share the papers as well. So take your time.
Let me, you asked for evidence of a retrotransposon going from non-functional to what?
So if you can see here, I'm screen sharing, there's probably a bit of a lag. So my question was, do you have any empirical evidence, any technical papers that show a non-functional endogenous retrovirus or any one of the...
I'm seeing a bunch of things jumping around on here. I'm not sure.
Because I've got a lot of papers here.
Stop
so for example,
yeah, stop it on one that gives you that.
Hey, while you're finding the right
please.
paper, standing.
Yep, I'm there. So retroviral promoters in the human genome, endogenous non-retroviral RNA viruses, elements, evidence of a novel type of antiviral immunity. And John can speak to this as well. So we do know that they're functional DNA elements. Even the ALUs, fascinatingly, look at this. Intronic ALUs influence alternative splicing. So a direct prediction of our created heterozygosity model would be that the vast majority of our genome and DNA sequences and DNA elements, including the pseudogenes, would be functional. and important to the organisms, of course. So, and that's exactly what we see here based on peer-reviewed technical papers. So if you want to answer
And your
my question,
assertion is, but your assertion is that the non-functional are all just junk DNA, that they were, how did they get there to begin with then?
well, that's the thing. These were created units of DNA function. That's our prediction. So we've predicted, and it's in print from intelligent design PhD scientists years ago, that we would discover...
Intelligent design PhD scientists. Okay, I need to know. I need
standing. Hang on, man.
Real quick, I know you're excited. Okay, go ahead, John. Go ahead. I'll leave the papers.
I just need the references.
Since our opponent is going to try and go down that rabbit hole, let's go Science Direct. The neuronal gene ARC encodes a retrotransposon GAG protein that mediates intercellular RNA transfer.
Can you share the papers?
ARC protein exhibits. I'm on my phone, man.
I've got the papers here if you want to see them.
ARC protein exhibits similar biochemical properties as retroviral GAG proteins. Endogenous ARC protein is released from neurons and extracellular vehicles. ARC EVs and capsids can mediate intercellular transfer of ARC mRNA in neurons. That's just one example. There's plenty of those, and that's directly from Science Direct.
Okay, and these are transcribed from ERVs, from the components of an ERV, or just components that are similar to components that are in ERVs. See, I don't know because you're not providing me with any information. You're just reading it over a cell.
Themselves that have.
Can you not share the link to that so I can see what you're actually reading?
Okay, so are you going to listen to what I just said, which is my computer crashed. I'm doing this from my freaking phone right now. I can't be doing a bunch of.
Well, if he could just answer the question, then we can. I mean,
but the point I'm making is
on what he's saying right now.
You're trying to argue. You're trying to argue that we're not being able to counter this. You specifically used the GAG protein as a specific example, trying to play a gotcha moment, and I am responding with a specific use of the GAG protein for retrotransposons and the retroviral elements that it is as functional that you just used as evidence for it not being evidence in our favor. So I'm not really sure how you're reaching that conclusion.
If I can I jump in there and get a little clarification on something real quick?
Of course. Go ahead, JL.
So real quick, I'm just kind of curious. What about this process are you questioning that is allowing for the insertion of a creator or designer in order to explain the mechanism of what you're saying?
Right. So we're saying that these supposed ERVs, they're claimed to be ancient infections of viruses. Therefore, are they really the ancient invasion of viruses, or are they functional DNA units? And I'm pointing out that the evidence shows that these ERVs are functional, but not only that, they have crucial functions that help regulate genes and even determine cell types. For example, real quick. For example, I have a paper here that says, far from being junk DNA, and this is in peer-reviewed journals, the pervasive retrotransposons that populate the genome, and no one's disagreeing that we find these retrotransposons in our genome, but it says they have a powerful capacity to influence genes and chromatin. So my question is, do you have any evidence that suggests that these are not functional units of DNA function?
Yeah, there is no need outside of a fucking RNA. There's no need to have any transcriptase, right? There's no need.
So
why would you hold on? Why would you need
literally undergo
reverse transcriptase? I'm sorry, reverse transcriptase.
Let's give Team a chance to respond.
So reverse transcriptase would not be needed for anything that had DNA. Our entire genetic code is DNA. There is no RNA in it. It's DNA. Okay. So why is there a code inside of our DNA that codes for the reverse transcriptase gene or protein?
Okay. So you obviously don't actually know what retrotransposons do in many cases, especially in embryo development, where they are physically inserted, taken from being DNA.
In embryo developments, where you have half of the genome, half of the genome is your mom, half of the genome is your dad. Yeah.
No.
I'm
talking post recombination, skeptic. So if you'll shut up and listen, the point I'm making, you just said they had no purpose, right? Well, what we now know is that as an example, in embryo development, retrotransposons are put into specific locations during embryo development. That process, which by the way uses the GAG protein, is taken from DNA, turned into mRNA, transferred by proteins, reverse transcriptase back into DNA, and inserted into a specific location during that developmental process. Then
it happens twice.
Hang on, not done yet. Then this goes back to time-based temporal controls that I talked about in my opening statement. at different, once that stage of development is passed, that same retro transposon is grabbed, is extracted from that position, moved to a different one, and now results in a different outcome when it's reinserted into a different position in the genome. So to say that that does not have significance when studies show that if you don't do that, embryos die. So
Right.
I'm pretty sure that if you can't live without it, that actually constitutes being rather important and having function your mental position aside.
Actually, and real quick, and I just want to make a quick point without being interrupted, and then Team Skeptic, take as much time
go
as
ahead,
you
I'm
need.
sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It's a good discussion, and you've brought up some good lines of evidence. Hopefully, we can move on to the fusion after this. But this topic deserves
No, we're not done yet with this.
heavy discussion. So, no, we can talk about this all day. So our point is that, you know, many of these so-called ancient viral infections are actually very good for us. So these retrotransposons, they're jumping around the genome, they're turning on and off various types of genes. Now, as John was kind of iterating regarding embryological development, there's a class of retrotransposons in the mouse embryo, okay, that when you deactivate it, the mouse embryo will develop and then it stops. Well, the question is why? It's because it depends on the function of these retrotransposons, which the evolutionists have always assumed was junk. So if these are incredibly important to our DNA, and you're saying that they're nothing more than ancient viral infections millions of years ago, were these mice just not having children until they got that viral infection, and then somehow that viral infection was co-opted? So the very simple question is, do you have any evidence?
So yes, the human placenta is exactly evidence of a useless junk RNA virus, ERV, okay, a retrovirus that got introduced into our genome and became pushed on from generation to generation, physically changed the way cells bind with each other. And this led to, eventually, it didn't immediately happen, but it eventually led to the humans being able to have a placenta on the inside of their body and babies to be born inside instead of being put out as an egg on the outside. Okay. Now we can track this ERV all the way back to the beginning of primates, or not primates, mammals.
Well,
we can track this
inferred.
all the way.
We can't track it. It's inferred. You're looking in the fossil record.
So
you
we can wrong. We can go into the genetic. No, we can find this. We can find this ERV in the genetic.
One
sec.
No, of all mammals.
But we see the ERVs are there.
And the cytokine 1 and 2. No, cytokine 1 and 2. Hold on. Yes, listen. Cytokine. Hold on. No. Because listen, the original mutation.
One sec. Hold on, bro. Sorry, team. I'll let you talk in a sec. I muted you both just to regain order. Let's give team a chance to respond, and then I promise we'll come back to you standing for truth.
Interrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the actual mammals, we don't even, as humans, we don't even use that mutation anymore anyway. We've already gone beyond that to cytokine 1 and 2 proteins that we use for our placenta. So yes, we've continued to mutate away from that original mutation that was because of the ERV. And we can track that ERV across all mammalian species, not just primates.
Okay, here, let me respond real quick. So you can track through genome sequencing, you can track the patterns regarding these ALUs, the ERVs, the retrotransposons. Yes, they do form nested hierarchical patterns. Therefore, are they there by design or ancestry? So we're pointing out that these ERVs specifically, if you want to focus on that, they accomplish extremely crucial functions in regulating gene expression, differentiation, and development. And this is seen across the entire animal kingdom, for example. So you're assuming that they are the result of ancient viral infections. And we're pointing out, no, these are functional DNA elements. And we're listing off function after function after function in paper after paper after paper. So our question to you is, do you have a technical paper you can screen share that could show us a non-functional endogenous retrovirus or any one of these classes of retrotransposons going from non-functional to something extremely functional in our genome? Can you provide that?
Actually, if I can jump in there real quick, because there's a problem with the line of reasoning that you're going down, because what you're asking him for would not be evidence to support the insertion of a creator into the argument. So whether it exists or not is still not evidence to put a designer or any kind of creator in that fashion, an external, influence. It still would not be evidence for that, and that's where you're coming from. That's the foundation of your argument: is the influence of a designer exterior to the natural processes of the Earth of the
Okay,
planet.
so let's think about your point right there. So the point that I was making in the context of the temporal variable control of gene expression in something that until this was realized was considered junk DNA with no purpose, supposedly evidence of evolution.
You gotta stop using you gotta stop using the term junk DNA. It's vestigial DNA. That's what it is. It's vestigial. It's no longer useful, but it's still
Well,
in code
actually,
at
it's really being
times.
called non-coding DNA or gene regulatory networks now is actually the real term.
Okay.
For it.
Right.
But
Junk DNA is dog whistles to another area of thought. So,
But remember,
dog
the areas
whistles,
that
the words that come
evolutionists
directly
once
out of people
assumed-
like Dawkins's mouth. Okay, I don't think so, buddy. But the point I was making is you're
Yeah, go
claiming that
ahead.
there's no evidence for a designer, when I'm talking about time-based
foundation of your
variable
argument, isn't it?
control of time-based. Okay, so you suggesting that natural selection somehow had the ability to foresee the future and put in
Right.
time-based
math.
controls in two different areas that have zero connection point?
no, these are natural functions of DNA under evolutionary pressures.
Oh, really? Time-based control that's happening in,
You're
hyper-specific
coming with argument from complexity. Is that it is complex. It's extremely complex, but complexity is not evidence for an external.
Let's think about this.
It's also a confirmed prediction of our model. That's the important thing.
The problem is that the problem is that however you want to argue the complexities of how DNA works or how all of these processes work in an environment of evolutionary pressures, none of this leads to evidence that supports the insertion of an external creator, an external instigator.
I just want to make a point real quick.
JL, did we get all your point there, JL?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
so it's not just an argument from complexity. It's also an argument from the fact that we're making testable predictions. The gold standard of science is making testable predictions. Evolutionists have always assumed that the vast majority of our genome is non-functional evolutionary leftovers. You can see a recent paper in 2017 from Dan Grar that says, well, if ENCODE is right, which ENCODE revealed that over 80% of our genome is actively transcribed into RNA suggesting function, then evolution is wrong, because that means those mutations that are accumulating are going to degenerate us a lot faster than they ever thought. So they have to hold to the assumption that the vast majority of our genome is junk. Yet now we know even pseudogenes, they produce RNAs that increase the expression of their corresponding functional genes, the ERVs, the ALUs, all of these other classes of retrotransposons, the non-protein coding RNAs, they regulate virtually all aspects of the gene expression pathway. And we have these predictions in print and they come true and they're confirmed every single day. What kind of predictions can you guys make regarding DNA function? Go ahead.
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a simple question real quick. How I want you to explain to me how it's possible for humans and chimpanzees to both have that ERV on arm 10, on short arm 10. How is it possible for both of them to have the ERV in the exact same location with the exact same LTR to LTR? I mean, not the LTR to LTR continuity, but the exact same location on both of the arms on both species. I'm sorry.
That's a good question. So that comes down to my initial question: are they really the ancient infection of viruses, or are they created units of DNA function? So when it comes to the nested hierarchical patterns, you're right. We do see more shared endogenous viruses and ALUs, for example, with chimps than we would with the old world monkeys and down the line. We do see nested hierarchies. Yeah. Right. No, I agree with that. So that's why that question is, are they created units of DNA function, or are they the result of ancient viral infection? So I pointed out in my opening that naturally we have, as humans, we have designed things with groups within groups patterns. Okay. So if we were to look at the types of vehicles, for example, or even just modes of transportation that we have created, we accidentally build in these groups within groups nested hierarchical patterns. For example, if we look at a sedan, they have a tremendous amount of similarities with other sedans. Now, if you bring in, say, a semi-tractor trailer, that's obviously much more different than a sedan, kind of comparing it to like a dog versus a human being or a chimpanzee. But those two modes of transportation are similar enough to each other that it sets them apart from airplanes. So we would expect, based on the design model, that humans and chimps would share more of these DNA units than a human and a dog. So the nested hierarchical patterns, though, that line of evidence, that observation, that's agnostic to the debate. But the differentiating line of evidence would be the DNA function. Are they non-functional evolutionary leftovers, or are they created units of DNA function? And the evidence suggests that they are functional DNA units. Go ahead.
No, but okay, yes, you could say that there's an equal probability on both models until you bring in the LTR to LTR discontinuity as a function of time. So as you stated, we do see more, let's say with old world monkeys, okay?
Yes.
We do see, let's say we have an ERV that we both share with an old world monkey, we expect to see, based on the evolution model, we expect to see every lineage that broke off from the old world monkey, the orangutan, the gorilla, the chimpanzee, the human. We should see that ERV in each of those people. But also another prediction that's made, because evolution says that random mutations happen. For it to be random means that some LTRs will eventually have a random mutation on them. If we were to always see LTRs always exactly the same, then we would need to explain that with our theory of evolution. So with our model of evolution. So what we see in the old world monkey, what we should see is the ratio of discontinuity between the two LTR sites should be greater with old world monkeys, a little bit less with orangutans, a little bit less with gorillas, a little bit less with chimpanzees, and then all the way down to what we have as a human. Now that's another thing. That's a second model that validates, that works exactly with what we're saying when it comes to natural selection.
Well, real quick, yeah. So it's just like your highly conserved mitochondrial DNA proteins, for example, the cytochrome C. All of these gene sequences that you look at, they form nested hierarchical patterns. And the evolutionists, universal common descent, would predict that those differences are a reflection of time, divergence time. We're going to share more with a chimp because we share more of a recent common ancestor with a chimp than we do with a rabbit. But that's why the question is, are they actually the result of mutations over time? Evolutionists assume that all the DNA differences are the result of mutation over time. But the prediction that we make, and I explained it in my opening regarding the created heterozygosity hypothesis, that God would have front-loaded these functional DNA elements and units into Adam and Eve, which would apply universally across species, we predict them to be functional. Since we both predict the patterns, the nested hierarchical patterns, we both expect more similarities in a human and a chimp than we would with a human and an old world monkey or a human and a rabbit. This is just common sense, realistically. Therefore, if you can provide evidence that these are really non-functional evolutionary leftovers or the result of mutations and mistakes over time, then yeah, that would be evidence for universal common ancestry. But what we find is that they are extremely functional and important to our genome. And that's why the same question I've been asking you since the beginning, you need to provide us evidence, whether it's in a technical paper or just give us an argument here as to how these retrotransposons or the pseudogenes, ALUs, whatever you want to look at, have gone from non-functional viral infections or mistakes to something incredibly functional in our genome. And I want to give you as much time as you need to just how's that possible?
Evolution is an extremely complex system of pressures. Okay. Right. It's not, a lot of people always think it's just one pressure that dictates how a species will evolve, but it's not. It's the environment of pressures that pushes a species in one direction versus another. Even just seeing when we separate modern day species, we separate them for long enough in different environments, we start to notice genetic differences based on just the simple separation of the two species. Even though they still remain in the same species and they can breed with each other and whatnot, we can begin to see genetic changes in one species versus another. Okay, so the evolution of a retrovirus into something that's functional, and from something that's non-functional into something that's functional, it's possible due to exactly what we say in is the driving mechanism for evolution.
But that's just stories.
The fact that it's a random mutation that ultimately either was selected for or against when it comes to the pressures of the environment.
So, in no offense, in other words, no answer has been given. Go ahead, John. Yeah, I don't want to dominate. Go ahead, John.
Quick interjection here. So, to me, it sounds like the logic flow you're trying to follow is if
what's a story?
Tom Brady and his wife before he got married to his wife, you tried to have sex with her and she refused. Then she goes and reproduces with Tom Brady, and then all of their people stay and only procreate with NFL players and former Victoria's Secret models. And then you fast forward down, and now, oh my goodness, we're seeing some differences in these people. Does that mean that they are now examples of evolution, or are they still humans that are now having existing functions expressed in a different variation?
Right. Good
Okay.
point.
And because that's exactly what's
So-
happening, and that is also exactly what is occurring in what you're trying to explain as evolution. It's not the result of new function; it's the modification of existing function, whether it be through epigenetics or through actually degradation of existing
Right.
function,
Degradation.
or the maximization of recessive genes to now become dominant genes. This isn't some kind of whole new organism coming into play. We're talking about variations within existing functionality.
Right. Which is
Right.
That's like saying if you went and did some drag and drop on some software and you turned on
Okay,
a
so-
function that you had deactivated, now you're going to say that's evolution. Come on, now.
or
Okay.
okay. Go
So
ahead.
here's what we say. All right, we say we have a idea, a concept, a model. Okay, and this model will give us predictions that we can test. And here's what our model says: random mutations are going to happen, and these mutations will be passed on through sexual through genetics, through the
Right.
passing of procreation. Okay, so we can take just those two concepts and begin to test theories out, begin to test our data to see if it matches what our theory
And
says.
how is that hypothetical tested? How is that actually being accomplished? Is there
Because
any
Okay,
we're
sort of-
so
showing-
do
hang on,
you
we're showing
understand?
how it can
Okay,
be tested.
Are
do
there any
you
math- are there
understand?
any
Listen,
algorithmic
listen,
assumptions being
listen,
made?
listen. Do you understand that when a retrovirus, when the ERV inserts itself, that the LTR sites on each
You're
side will be
assuming the
identical?
insertion, though.
Hold on. No, wrong.
So you
You're
don't
incorrect.
see.
Hold on.
Okay.
HIV is a fucking retrovirus. It inserts itself into our DNA. This is not something new to us. You do understand that the LTR sites on both sides are identical, correct? When they're inserted.
Well,
They
that's a
have to
bad
be.
example because HIV
No,
exists in all primates,
hold
but
on.
it doesn't
You
exist
say
in all
that
humans. So it's
you're
actually
saying
bad
that
evidence to
no,
bring
you're
up.
saying that the LTR is an assumption I'm making, that the retrovirus is inserting itself into the DNA. This is not an assumption that I'm making. This
me
is
make a point.
absolutely
Okay.
genetic fact. Hold
Let me
on.
make a-
Do
Well, I
you
wanna make a
agree
point
or
about what you're
disagree?
saying about
Hold
the-
on. Do you agree or disagree that the LTR sites on both sides of the insertion of a retrovirus are identical? That's the first thing I want to ask you. Yes or no?
Sure, it doesn't matter if they're
Okay,
identical
great,
or not because
great.
that doesn't
Yes, it
answer the
does.
question. No, it
Absolutely
doesn't.
fucking does. Because retroviruses are nothing new to us. Okay, they've been going on for millions and millions and millions of years, and we see it in our
Another assumption.
DNA.
We've never seen
That's fine.
a
You can
viral
say
infection.
that's
That's why
fine.
they're called
That's fine.
ancient viral
That's
infections,
fine
because
that
they're
you
said
don't
to
want
have
to
happened
accept
millions
it.
of years ago.
That's fine that you don't want to accept it, but we see it in our genetics, and
I've
you're
been
going to have to
trying to ask you
explain
the
it
same question
other than to
since the
say,
beginning.
right, hold
And
on.
you haven't answered
I-
it.
Hold on,
then
one
then
second.
walk
Thomas,
through
we'll
the
just
logic.
regulate you standing.
I've started by asking you first off if the LTR sites were the same on each side of a retrovirus, and you began to say, how do we even know that retroviruses are inserted? That is intellectual dishonesty at its finest, because we know for a fact that retroviruses do exist and they do insert themselves into the human genome. Okay, that's how they fucking that's how they expand and go from
Here's the thing
cell
is
to
the
cell.
retrovirus. Well, real quick, let me say, the thing is the retroviruses themselves could have originated from within the host genome instead of invading it from the outside, because this would have had to been the case.
Do you have any proof of that?
I've shown.
We have
paper
proof
after-
today.
Real quick.
No, do you have
Hey,
any
I
proof
didn't
that it
interrupt
was
you. I let you
automatically
finish what you're
inserted?
saying.
You're
Let's-
right.
let's
Go
kick
ahead.
it
Go
over.
ahead.
You
You're
know-
right.
Let's kick it over.
You
to
know,
Andy.
viruses are dependent upon host cells. That means that the cell's genome had to predate the viruses, because if viral DNA is inserted, as you're saying, at random into the genome millions of years ago and became an endogenous retrovirus, guess what? It's more likely to disrupt existing genes. For example, a blindfolded painter is obviously going to mess up the painting he is working on by just applying random brushstrokes to it. Therefore, that's why the
That's a
question
bad
is,
argument.
how did
Yeah,
these...
you can't say that.
No,
You can't
it's
say
not
that
a
it
bad
most. No, you
argument.
can't
Hold
say
on,
that it would most
let's-
likely do that because our sample size is 1.
Well, let's give him a chance to respond and then finish that point he was making, and then I promise we'll come right back to Team and JL.
Right. So my question is very simple. We both expect the nested hierarchical patterns and the similarities, okay? We predict that these are functional DNA elements important to our genetics. And that's exactly what we find, that they're important in regulating gene expression. They're important in the gastrointestinal tract. I mean, I provided about 15 papers. Here's a question.
All of that is predicted by natural selection.
Okay, well, real quick, I don't
Hey,
want to.
team, how about you shut your mouth and let us actually
Hold
talk?
on.
You've been dropping
I got
F-bombs.
it.
How
I
about you
got
shut
it,
up,
John.
man?
Yeah, here, I'm going to ask a quick question. I want you to actually answer
Fuck
this,
off.
okay? So if we're looking at something like a DNA unit that's not consistent with a hierarchy, it's a question I asked in my opening regarding orphan genes, because there's a huge problem for your model here of animal origins, is the fact that these novel DNA sequences that are highly functional exist. And guess what? They're unique traits that are associated with and appear suddenly and fully functional without any real trace of evolutionary ancestry. I asked this question to Conspiracy Cats in a debate the other day, and unfortunately no response from him. Do you have an explanation for these?
Oh, he responded to you. He responded to you, and you ran from his 57 independent studies that he gave you of volume of the ocean. I saw that.
No, actually,
So,
I pointed out the incredible
yeah, you
assumption.
didn't.
Hey,
Wait,
let's
wait,
not
wait,
argue
wait,
over
wait,
somebody
hang on a
else's
second.
debate. How about
So
you
besides
answer
the
the
point,
question?
One sec.
You're going to
Order,
get
order,
back
order.
to
Hold on.
mine.
One sec, guys.
Hold on. I was making a point when he started getting away from the point, and I'm going to bring it back to the point. All right. Evolution predicts that, first off, evolution doesn't predict that the LTR sites are going to be identical. That is how genetics works. That's how a retrovirus inserts itself into our DNA. So the LTR sites at insertion they have to be identical. There's no arguing that. They have to be. It wouldn't fit in if it didn't. It would result in a damaged DNA and it wouldn't work. So it has to be original. Now, all I'm saying is, I'm not saying let's go look at the data and make up how this happened looking at the data. I'm saying let's talk about what evolution is, and let's go look at the data and see if it matches our evolutionary model or not. Now, what evolution says is that random mutations from the point of insertion moving forward in time, any random mutation on one LTR will be unique to that LTR. You won't see it on one LTR and then get it on the other. Okay? So evolution suggests that retroviruses that were inserted further back in time will have less of a discontinuity between the two LTR sites. And ones that are inserted further back will have more discontinuity between the LTR sites. And just like you guys were agreeing that in our hierarchy, it's humans, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, old world monkeys, right? I believe that's how it is, old world monkeys after orangutans. But then you should be able to go and look to see what the ratio of this discontinuity is and invalidate evolution based on just that. You should be able to go and do that, but you can't, because it matches up exactly with what we should say.
We are going to go to Q&A soon. I'll give you a chance to respond, standing for truth, and then hopefully we'll hear just a bit more from JL, just to be sure that he's had plenty of time to contribute, as well as John. And so, yeah, go ahead, standing for truth.
I'll make one last point and then let them take it over. So as I pointed out, the nested hierarchical patterns, the similarities in all of the biological world are expected on both sides. We build in homologous patterns. We also build in nested hierarchical patterns. And of course, since the creation event, mutations would occur. For one, mutations are degrading to the organism. So mutations are not going to take your fish to fisherman, but we would expect subtle differences in these sequences that could or could not reflect the nested hierarchical patterns. That's why I pointed out to a differentiating line of evidence, like the orphan genes, that are actually specific to particular organisms, and they're fully functional without any real trace of evolutionary history, and they're also inconsistent with any real hierarchy. So I was just looking for an answer to the orphan gene.
Let me ask you a question. I want to bring up, you said that any mutation is going to result in a degradation of the gene. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Well, that is incorrect, because the sickle cell anemia gene is I believe that's a remnant of a retrovirus.
Sickle cell?
Yeah, that's it's population specific to all ancestors from Africa.
Sickle cell anemia is due to a broken protein, broken cell.
That was caused by an ERV. It was caused by an ERV.
Let me see.
We
Okay,
pretty soon.
so
here.
are you suggesting that something that from a macro level has a degradation in function equals a non-negative mutation? Is that the point you're trying to make here?
No,
'Cause
he
that's, like,
said a
literally the
mutation
antithesis
is
of your point.
always no. He said a mutation degrades the DNA.
It does.
It does.
Because sickle cell
No, it
anemia is a
doesn't.
degradation.
No,
Okay.
you're completely
No.
ignoring
It
synergistic.
enables.
You're
It
completely
enables.
respond to the
ignoring
sickle cell
hang on,
anemia. You
hang on.
brought up a point.
It enables a slight advantage in terms of staving off malaria. And if you had things like
Yes,
the overall
you're right.
negative,
Yeah, right. And
negative,
why did we not have that? Why do white people not have sickle cell? Why do we not have the ERV or the sickle cell anemia?
Well, let me explain the sickle cell. I've studied that in
hang
great
on,
detail.
Standing, hang on just a second.
Yeah,
I'll
go
let you
ahead.
talk just a second. Team, I honestly wonder if you actually use your brain, because
What are you
just
fucking
asked
talking about?
what-
I
you
literally
I'm
just said that
responding
an
here. How about you
ER.
shut
He
up
said
and
an
let other
ERV
people
is
talk?
Let him
damaging.
respond.
We've got
John,
we
go
got
ahead.
Q&A
God.
soon. We got to
The-
make this snappy. So let's get to the arguments. Just
Okay, so
because we have limited
mute Team
time.
Skeptic then, because he's interrupting me every single time. You have a mutation that allows for a adaptation in a specific subset, but that mutation, to your point about why do white people not have this? Well, they weren't in the same scenario needing the adaptation, which was a result. It was a degradation of genetic function in the cell. And
So the degradation of the
I'm not
function
done talking
did.
yet, man. Put it back on mute.
Fuck you.
Yeah, would you suggest that people with sickle cell anemia do not have the greater risk at a plethora of other issues than, oh cool, I'm not
Oh
susceptible
yeah,
to
sure.
malaria.
When they're in America, but not when they're in Africa. No. In Africa, it helps them defend against malaria. Don't you think that's an
Captain, let him-
evolutionary advantage?
Okay, did you not follow the words that came out of my mouth, which
Jesus
was they have
Christ.
one advantage, but overall negatives. There's
Right.
So
many
it got
more
passed on.
negatives
It
than
got
positives
passed on
associated
in that
with it.
subset of population
if
and
you
not
can't
passed on in
comprehend that
ours.
premise, then clearly you do not have an
If
IQ
it's
less
not
40
advan-
To-
Right,
you have to-
if it's not
one
an
of you is
advantage-
going
if it
to
doesn't
All you
give
can
us
do
defer
is
to
drop
the other
F-bombs
to
and
Can I
not
make a
actually let
quick
people
point?
respond to you.
Well, can I make a
Yeah.
quick point on sickle cell? People that have that mutation that cause sickle cell anemia have a broken gene, which makes a broken protein. This means that overall, this mutation is reductive. That's our point. Yeah, why is it beneficial? They say, well, okay, people with this broken gene and broken protein, the red blood cells are defective to the point, okay, where malaria cannot thrive in the person with this condition. Therefore, they are more resistant to malaria. But guess what? The sickness associated with the disease results in a resistance to the malaria parasite due to broken cells, broken protein. That's
Standing,
reductive. It's not taking
let me,
anything
Standing,
forward.
one insertion here. Sickle cell anemia is an inherited disease, operative word, that affects red blood cells with an abnormal version of hemoglobin, the protein
Okay,
that carries
so
oxygen throughout the body.
We're going to, because we let
It
both
is literally a
we're going to let-
disease.
because we let Standing
I didn't
and
say it
John,
wasn't a fucking
hold on one
disease.
second.
Well, then
'Cause
you
we-
can't say,
hold
but
on a
are
second.
you saying
hold
that
on.
cancer
John,
is a
listen,
positive?
Hold on a second.
Yeah, Lord, man,
Is
you're stupid as
because
hell.
we are okay. It's on mute only because of you're on mute. So the point here is we gave Standing for Truth and John those last two 1-2, that 1-2 combo there, and then what we'll do now is give the last word over to Team and JL, and then once we give them the last chance to reply, we will go into the Q&A.
So is it on me in jail right now?
Yep.
Okay. So the entire argument that, that God created us all this way, and this is why we see similar ERVs and primates, why we can go and track which primate is least like us based on all these genes. And we can just say, oh, well, God just did that. Or we can say, we can apply scientific knowledge to it. And without even saying, let's try to get our evidence to support our conclusion, we can just define what the mechanism is, and we can say what do we expect to see. And every time we look, we expect to see exactly what evolution predicts. We expect to see the ERVs in the same location, as they're not fucking random. They don't just randomly select from one genetic when we have an offspring, that ERV doesn't just move completely to a different chromosome. It's going to be location specific, which is one of the ways we can use it to identify common ancestors. The
And-
LTR to LTR. I'm sorry.
Do we get a quick closing too, uninterrupted?
Yeah, I was thinking like last word as in like the
Oh,
last.
I was
point
just
on
doing my
that.
conclusion.
I just need
I
20
was doing my
seconds and then
conclusion.
John. I just need
I was
20
doing my
seconds and then
conclusion.
John can take the rest. So The one thing, unfortunately, so we addressed the
Short and
ERV. Yep. So we addressed the
Hey, so
ERV.
Hold
gonna
on.
be quick,
I didn't
20
know that
seconds.
team. Well, let's go back to team to let him finish that closing, and
Oh,
then we'll give you a
sorry, go
closing
ahead.
standing.
no, I'm totally confused as to what the fuck's actually going on. Am I doing my
The
outro
last
right now?
word, by last word, I meant like the last word on the particular issue that you guys were going back and forth on. But we can do a closing. That works. Let's do a closing.
Okay, I'll
Not
I'll make
you. I interrupted team, so we got to let him finish that closing, and then we'll come
Of
back
course.
to you.
My apologies, James.
No problem.
Okay. So basically, the entire argument is that God all set it in motion, and there's, looking beyond what we want to find is if we ever find anything that science can explain, we'll just go ahead and attribute it to God and just blow off the scientific explanation. However, we can not assume God as someone like me, right? I can not assume God, and I can come to the same exact conclusions as you can based on scientific models. And then when comparing the data, the modern scientific data that we can take will corroborate the model of evolution. This is done with LTR to LTR ratio discontinuities, and it's done with the placement and location of ERVs. Two things that creationists will never be able to explain, no matter how hard they try.
Well, okay, hold on. So sorry. I've done something wrong because now standing for truth would be both starting and ending, which is not good. So what we can do is
I don't
Dang
even
it,
care.
I had
I'm getting
fun.
a closing statement, James.
Oh well, yeah. I have a quick closing. I'll even set my timer
JL
less than a
gets-
minute. And
JL
then pick it
gets
up
it.
last one.
Why don't we'll give you standing a closing or John, and then we'll go back to JL for a final closing.
Yeah,
Thanks for that idea,
I just
team.
need
That was team's idea.
Sure. I just need 30 seconds. I'll even put my timer on. So yeah, obviously we addressed the ERV sufficiently. He had no answer. He dodged the question the entire time. We addressed the nested hierarchies. The other thing he brought up was the chromosome 2 fusion. I predicted that, so I refuted it in my opening. That reputed fusion site is overlapped by a functional gene. The so-called fusion site he points to is not a fusion site at all. It's a functional component of that DDX11L2. So he can look that up. There's no evidence for the cryptic centromere he talks about, and no evidence for the vestigial telomeres. And then there's a satellite DNA problem. So we've provided predictions on DNA function. We didn't even get to touch on the molecular clocks that point us right back to Adam and Eve. But I would say this was a good debate, but I don't think they answered any questions, including the orphan gene question. So go ahead, John. You can finish the rest of it.
I mean, obviously, Team Skeptic has some serious anger issues and also a significant IQ problem, given the fact that he can't comprehend that something that is classified as a disease would not equal a degradation in genetic function versus a positive. I mean, that just how you can even come to that conclusion and then angrily defend it obviously speaks to his lack of rational thinking and inability to use his brain to actually contemplate whether or not this crap he's spewing actually has reasonable expectation, or if it's a fantasy fairy tale that gets told based on dramatic assumptions on, oh, we're going to track all this history and this lineage, but let's not talk about or tell people what the assumptions are in our algorithms that we're using to supposedly prove our evidence beyond all doubt. I find it so ironic how people who believe in intelligent design are accused of being the ones making things up when, of course, you can make your predictions have evidence if you literally argue or alter the factors and the variables needed to result in the end outcome that supports your position. So everybody, I'm going to be doing a after party over on my channel. Come over there and we'll discuss some of this stuff in more detail.
We'll give
Thanks
the
so
last.
much, James.
We'll give the last word to JL, and we will basically what we'll do is if anybody on any side has an after show, let us know, and we can make you a mod so you can put it in the live chat, and we can even put it in the description for you, and that's no matter what side you're on. So we will kick it over to JL for the very last word before the Q&A.
Oh, wow, where to begin on that? So, so the forest of genetics and evolutionary biology is very, very dense, and it's not typically where my focus usually is. I'm usually focused on theists and where they try to inject their god into the argument. As far as the conversation that went, we never did get to the chromosome 2. They never did provide any thing to oppose that, and never to address the reproductive advantages of sickle cell anemia in African populations. And they're, they don't have a response to LTR and LTR discontinuity. But ultimately, our opponents are bearing the lead in the respect because they're creationists. They come from this theory of, or this hypothesis of creationism. And the problem is that whether you don't want to get lost in the miasma of information that you can get from genetics, but the problem is you're still inserting a creator, you're still inserting a designer at some point in there, and there is no evidence for that. So when you create your theory and then you try to mold the facts to fit your theory, that's where your problem. You're inherently biased in that, in the conclusion that you draw from that. You have to take the facts and then mold the theories to fit the facts as you come across them, and that you have not done. In your arguments, you completely throw out synergistic epistasis, which facilitates the purging of deleterious mutations in sexual reproductive populations. You completely ignore the function of telomeres. And I noticed how you didn't mention it, but you did post it up in the deal that you have a big thing about genetic entropy, which is pretty much bullshit. Has been completely debunked. It's just a made up term for, if I remember the actual scientific term, is actually error catastrophe. And error catastrophe has never been observed or demonstrated in a lab or in nature. So it's literally just a made up thing that is thrown around, saying that mutations ultimately are degrading the human genome or degrading human genetics. That's all bullshit. You made a lot of just straight up false claims. I can't go into all of them because I have a giant list here and I'm trying to be quick for James's account. But ultimately, the guy that you're basing all this off of, Dr. John Sanford's work, he was a plant geneticist. He worked with plants. He is a master's in horticulture, and he's an intelligent design proponent. And unfortunately, all of the papers that he constructed into Mendel's accountant, none of them were peer reviewed. The reason he didn't have them peer reviewed is because they were easily debunked when people looked at them. That's why he didn't put them out there. He put them in non-peer reviewed journals. So unfortunately, everything you're coming out with has either been debunked or is based upon the biased conclusion that there was an inserted creator somewhere, which you have no evidence for. Even the lack of information on our half is still not evidence for a creationer or a designer or a god, if you want to put that term on it. So until you have that evidence, creationism has no foundation.
We'll switch into Q&A. Want to say thanks to our speakers, as today has been a rowdy one. By the way, if you didn't see last night's debate, dear gosh, I didn't expect that. If anybody ever tells you that philosophy isn't exciting, watch last night's debate on whether or not we can know if we exist. Never would I have guessed it would have been the way it was. So Woden Toad, thanks for your question, says, James, can we have a young Earth versus flat Earth debate? That would certainly be interesting. I know that Nathan Thompson wants Kent Hovind. Kent Hovind is not as responsive as he used to be with us. So if there's anyone else out there, especially I think Nathan also wants to debate whether that there's a dome over the Earth, let us know.
I have a suggestion. Why don't you have Nathan Thompson and another flat earther debate these two guys? That will be a word salad that everybody can enjoy.
That would be juicy. And Stupid Whore Energy strikes again. She says left-handed molecules can be created inside asteroids, and proteins started out very small and became today's more complex proteins through duplication and fusion. Creationists.
Yeah, we didn't get to my evidence for the chromosome 2. I'm sure he wanted to speak of SFT. We didn't get to that point, man. I know that you wanted to talk about it.
Talking right now.
This has to do. Shut the fuck up, dude. I'm talking to SFT, not to your dumbass.
I'm pretty sure there's a question that was just addressed towards us, not you.
No, I mean technically it's I think targeted. It's meant to refute Standing and John.
Okay. Well. After John gets done being butthurt, when John gets done fucking rambling, I'll ask SFT my relative question.
What we will do is we'll kick it back to you for a rebuttal, team. Standing for Truth, John, what have you got? Stupid Whore Energy all up in your face.
Yeah, so that whole synthesis that we can't pull off in the lab, that's a problem. You've got stunning improbabilities, which I think is pretty. Oh, you think that's funny, Team Skeptic? Yeah, okay. Go do some research on how they can't do it in the lab without protein, without ribosomes and enzymes already existing.
Stanley, did you want to mention anything before we kick it over to Team for his rebuttal?
No, I think John covered it in great detail. So there's obviously no evidence for abiogenesis, and I think the evolutionists would even admit to that. So yeah, whatever they got to say, go ahead.
Gotcha.
Yeah, SFT. All I wanted to say was we didn't get a chance to talk about chromosome 2. I have a lot of evidence for that. We'll have to get together and talk about that in the future. I felt
Yeah,
like
we
I could have a conversation with you. This other jackass just can't seem to get my
call
cock
you
out of
out
his
for being a
mouth.
little bitch. Yeah, you're right.
All right.
Timed
enough.
rebuttals only.
No.
Let's be
There are theories for
friendly.
abiogenesis. We just don't know particularly which one it is, but there is certainly no evidence to support that it was a god.
I will happily have a full-scale abiogenesis only debate with either one of you.
Did either
Timed
one of
rebuttals.
us?
Timed
Hold on,
rebuttals
hold
only,
on,
James.
hold on, hold
Timed
on.
rebuttals
Did
only.
either one of us at any point tonight say that abiogenesis is a fact, that we know exactly what happened? Did either one of us say that?
How is that even? Why are you even
All right,
asking that question?
why
I
are
just
you
said I'll have a
fucking
debate
straw
on it with
manning?
you.
Why are you straw
You actually
manning?
have comprehension
Why are you straw
skills? Because
manning?
apparently
Are
you
you?
are an idiot.
Are you?
we'll do
When
is-
I
all
laughed,
right.
what did you say? When I laughed, what did you say? Oh, is there? You really think there's stuff for abiogenesis? I wasn't even laughing about fucking anything that you said about abiogenesis, because I can honestly sit here where you and I
can honestly
differ.
say that you're
No,
triggered,
where
buddy.
you
Calm
and
down.
I
Wait, hold
differ.
on.
Let me tell you something. Where you and I differ is that
Pull
you
that stick
can
out of your ass,
admit
man.
you can admit that a creator is only a fictional possibility for you, that there's no evidence to support that. You can't provide me with a single piece of physical evidence. Every piece of your evidence has to be made up. But here you are, you're willing to debate anybody on abiogenesis, which is something most physicists
Then
will
have
sit there
your
and say
balls
is
drop
a
and stop talking
possibility,
shit and let's
a
schedule a debate.
probability,
What we
but
have to
not
do
a
here is-
guarantee.
I'm going to give, just because the
Fucking
super
moron.
chat was originally targeting Standing for Truth and John, I'll give them the last word and we got to move on to the next one.
Sure. I'll say one thing, I guess. My problem is the fact that DNA is extremely fragile. As we know, it's subject to oxidation. Oxygen destroys it. Water destroys it. The strands break. So this is not a system that's actually maintainable without a maintenance system. Therefore, you can't start with DNA because it's going to break down far too quickly. In order to maintain DNA in our cells, we need very complex repair mechanisms. And there exist different repair mechanisms for different types of problems. So what came first, DNA or the ability to maintain the DNA, which is encoded in the DNA? So it's chicken and egg problems abound.
Next up, Dwayne Burke, thanks for your super chat. Said it's delusional to think that intelligence isn't required to assign each individual that ever lives a unique DNA code and fingerprint. I think that's for you and Team and JL.
I think that's a facetious question directed at them, to be honest. Can you re-ask the question again?
No, I know,
please.
Dwayne Burke. That's directly at you, buddy.
I was like, no,
they
I'd
said-
like to hear it again, please.
They said it's delusional to think that intelligence isn't required to assign each individual that ever lives a unique DNA code and fingerprint.
Yeah, that
That feels like a
on
troll
them.
question. Yeah, that's
Somebody's asking a facetious
Yeah.
question for them. Facetious.
I know I know him personally, so that's the only reason why I think he's being sincere. I know
Oh,
that he's
okay.
creative.
Well, that's exactly what fucking evolution would predict. That, in fact, evolution would predict that each one of our DNA is slightly different than every other person out there.
Gotcha. And thanks for your super chat from Stupid Horror Energy Strikes Again. She says, quote, "It has been established that a decrease in the number of chromosomes by 2 in humans is a result of the fusion of 2 autosomes," unquote. That is a quote from a paper published this year. It hasn't been overturned. I think that's for you, Standing for Truth, and John.
Yeah, I mean, we could do I've had entire debates on the chromosome 2 fusion. I'd love to, we could have a respectful discussion on that with Team Skeptic. I mean, just even forgetting about the degeneracy of the area, the lack of evidence for cryptic centromere, the function of it. I just have one quick question that the fact, and I have a paper here, I provided it in my opening, that chimps have very distinctive and very large satellite sequences at the ends of their chromosomes, but they're absent in man. And guess what? These large ape-specific satellite sequences should be seen flanking the reputed fusion site on both sides if there really was a fusion and if we really are related to apes. But guess what? They're not there. They're absolutely absent. So I'd like an answer to that. I think that's an important question, and I don't believe an answer has been provided. Therefore, it has been overturned. So,
Let's get to the next one. Smoky Saint, thanks for your super chat, said after show LPP's, namely John Maddox, Logical, Plausible Probables channel, open mic in all caps. Next up, thanks for your super chat from Angel Garay, said need evidence for creation.
Need evidence for creation?
Yes, special creation.
Is there any?
I spent 7 minutes providing predictions regarding speciation rates. We didn't get into that, unfortunately.
Still not
Molecular
evidence for a
clocks.
creator. It's evidence that you don't understand how something happens. And
And
you're
I
inserting
you didn't
God
listen
as
to
Well,
the
my
answer.
apparently you
opening
guys don't
statements.
understand because there were lack of answers to the questions I gave. But I pointed out that the gold standard of science is testable predictions, and we're doing it in molecular clocks and the mitochondrial DNA. The book of Genesis tells us that God created two people, Adam and Eve. Therefore, we can make predictions, and the predictions that we're making are coming true, and that's the gold standard of science. Evolutionists aren't making predictions; creation wins. So there
So
you
the
go.
Bible is a science textbook. That's what you're asserting.
No, but we can read the Bible and the account of human origins in Genesis, and we can say, okay, let's see if we can make accurate predictions and retrodictions. And it turns out that we have, and evolutionists aren't doing it. Evolutionists are not making predictions in mitochondrial DNA. The mitochondrial DNA takes us back 6,000 years, and the mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome are nothing like chimps. So
So
that
the
separates
Judeo-Christian
us from
faith,
chimps, and that proves biblical creation in
so the
Genesis.
suppositions, so the presuppositions of the Judeo-Christian faith are paramount in determining science.
No, but
That's what you're asserting.
the gold standard, there's two models here, but a lot of lines of evidence are agnostic to the debate. Therefore, when we look to the differentiating lines of evidence like molecular clocks, DNA function, we are making predictions in those types of sciences. And guess what? The evolutionists aren't, for example. And
Yeah, but the problem is you're still basing your argument, you're still basing your conclusions upon what you've read in the Bible. That you're going to the Bible. You're basically taking the Bible, which is a subjective book that can be interpreted in a myriad of ways, and you're deriving your conclusions from those. But
Okay,
the
so
Bible
your
differs
response-
from other texts.
So,
Okay,
so this
so which one
response
is-
that you're making is indicative of the fact that you don't actually know what the heck you're talking about in regards to our arguments, and that just
No,
because
I'm questioning your use of the Bible in
No,
determining anything.
yeah. Going
critically.
and figuring out whether or not something exists in terms of evidence for an intelligent agent, and then extrapolating it back. I mean, I'm not sure how that's any different than doing evolutionary
you're
research,
asserting-
going back to the
ultimately you're
foundational
asserting the
premise
book.
of
Ultimately,
Darwin.
you're asserting the book.
Come on now,
is
no,
the-
you
no,
guys go
ultimately
back to Darwin as your original
You are
source.
asserting the
So come
book
on now,
is
let's get
evidence
real.
of your creator.
I didn't
Come on
bring
over
up
to
It's not evidence of
Darwin.
your
All
creator.
right, we will go to the next one.
Hey, I didn't bring up Darwin one fucking time, and we have Neanderthal mitochondrial DNA that dates back further than 6,000 years.
What I can do is-
No,
What we can
you're
do
asserting that
is-
you're going back to the Bible because you're asserting that the Bible is evidence for your creator, and it is not. The Bible is just a book.
I have a paper here
Done.
that shows that
Okay,
Neanderthals.
Sorry.
you guys are some of the
hypermutating,
dumbest
so
people
that
I've
would
ever
explain
And all
debated.
you
it.
can
All
respond
right.
with is all you can
Let's
respond with
go.
are attacks to our intelligence.
That's a
What
good
we're
point.
going to
That's all you've
do
got.
Is we are going to go to the next question. I think that because that super chat was originally for
It was for us.
that
That
was
was
for
for
yeah.
us.
So go ahead if you want to have the last word, and then we'll go to the next one.
Yeah, my last word would be if those predictions and retrodictions that flow from a literal interpretation of Genesis were shown to be falsified, then we'd have to rethink the model. But it just turns out that the molecular clocks, the genetic diversity found in people around the earth, just so fits an origin of just two people, Adam and Eve, and the evolutionists had to invent post hoc, ad hoc rescue devices with their hypothetical population bottlenecking out of Africa. So we're the ones doing the science, and they're the ones doing the non-science.
No,
Thanks,
you're
John.
not.
I appreciate it.
No, you're not. Next one.
JPP3030, thanks for your question, said, do any of the authors of the papers standing for truth cites agree with him on anything he said in his opening?
Yes.
Gotcha. Next, Stupid Whore Energy strikes again. This time she says, we don't expect big differences between populations, except where there has been local selection for different genetic variants. I think this is for you, Standing for Truth, and John.
Yeah, whoever wants to take that one, John, you or myself.
Sorry, read the question again.
Next, let's see. That question was, we don't expect big differences between populations except where there has been local selection for different genetic variants.
Well, I know by rule we see, for example, we can look at the paper that I pointed out in the opening. I wish we would have been able to talk about, where it suggests that over 90% of species originated at the same time with modern humans. Well, you can look at even the CO1 gene, that highly conserved subset of a mitochondrial DNA protein, and you'll find less differences within species and more differences between species. So these nested hierarchical patterns exist. And those differences, the evolutionists will say, are markers of time and divergence time. And creationists would predict that those differences are there for functional purposes. So we're making the predictions, they're on paper. And it seems that those differences are there for functional reasons. So that's my answer.
So why are there no mammal fossils? So why are there no mammal
Stupid Horror
fossils?
Energy has another response. She says, standing for truth, not sure what you're talking about. Chromosome 2 also has satellite sequences, not only at both ends, but also in the middle.
No, yes, Stupid Horror Energy thinks I'm using a different argument about how telomere to telomere fusions, every fusion observed in nature has satellite DNA. I'm talking about the Ventura paper. I'm not sure if Stupid Horror Energy has read it, but the paper itself actually says that the presence of abundant amounts of chimpanzee-specific subtelomeric satellite DNA sequences are absent in humans. So I've discussed this with Ruhif through email. He's studied this topic in great detail, and he admits it's not there. The question is, why isn't it there? We'll have to debate that at a time in the future. So
Stupid Horror Energy has yet another response. She says, chromosome 2 fusion site is degenerate because the high mutability of telomere repeats. It's normal.
Yeah.
What's funny about that is those telomere-like motifs that are actually found there. Yeah, they're degenerate. And yeah, they say that it should be because it's highly mutable and it happened 6 million years ago. But guess what? We found, and I've got papers showing this, that those sequences are involved in expression. They're functional DNA elements, and they're found elsewhere in the genome, not even associated with chromosome fusion. So it's a double whammy for us. I know they have the rescue device, but that's what refutes that rescue device. Good question, though.
Next up, Henrik Simonson, thanks for your question, said, just like a snowball rolling down a hill is not a product of chance, but a product of gravity, John Maddox needs to demonstrate why life is a product of chance or drop his silly calculations.
Oh, okay. Yeah, come over to the live stream and we'll have you on, and I'll give you a little education on why that question is quite possibly one of the stupidest things of the night. And that's saying something, given the fact that we've been debating Team Skeptic and the lunacy that comes out of his mouth.
Let's get to the next question.
I found those numbers you threw up to be hilarious as well.
Oh, they're well accepted premises.
You don't understand anything.
James,
you don't
basic
math, buddy.
James, if I may, really fast,
Sure.
I'm still kind of curious as to, you said that that it was stated that you guys stated that all species came up together, that we came up together to your whole like young Earth creationist bullshit and everything.
That's
so
right.
why are there no mammalian fossils found in the Devonian strata?
Well, now we're getting into a totally different argument with the fossil record, but you just completely dodged the paper that suggests, based on the highly conserved CO1 gene, that there's low genetic diversity in this mitochondrial DNA protein. What they're doing is they're looking at a subset of mitochondrial DNA. There's low genetic diversity across the entire biological world, suggesting that all of biological life came into existence at the same time with humans. I'm not sure if you've read the paper. If you haven't, there's no point in commenting on it. But that's
you ever heard of
exactly
extinction?
What we expect from Genesis.
Have you ever heard of extinctions?
Right, that's what they resort to. Yeah.
Right.
So in the paper, and that's good.
Do we not experience extinctions? But do we not experience extinctions here in our modern history that can be confirmed by multiple reliable sources that we can, follow, like the possession of the evidence? You know what I'm saying? Like we can follow that back to the original person who made the prediction or made the observation. I mean, can we not agree that we do observe extinctions going on every year?
We can see that the cheetahs are experiencing a huge bottleneck. They're down to like 7,000. Yeah, extinction events are real. And when you read this paper, that's what they say. They say, we fought the evidence as hard as we could. And what they did was they invented a near extinction event, I think 200,000 years ago, just based on geology, not actual observed mutation rates or genetic diversity, to explain the low genetic diversity. But what's funny is our starting point would be a Genesis flood 4,500 years ago. There's your extinction event. Eroded genetic diversity. That's exactly what we see in this
we.
And this
I'm sorry.
Guess what? You
I
could
just find it.
that problem
Last thing. I find it incredible. Last thing. I find it incredibly telling.
We've got
Sorry, I find it incredibly telling that
We've got many questions. I
Why
hate
do
to
you
do
guys
this,
interrupt and I don't?
but we do have to keep moving. We have another.
I didn't interrupt
let's
you.
see. Ilya Moon,
No, you're
thanks
right.
for
That
your.
wasn't you. That was Jay. That
We
was
have to
Jay.
keep moving. I hate to do it, but it's
Incredibly
just
telling
that we
that
have,
you
having
we
completely
have many
accepted the.
questions,
I'm lightening
so I
the
do
mood.
have to keep.
Yeah,
we
we're
do have a
having fun.
lot of questions. So Ilya Moon, and also criticism for me now. Ilya Moon, thanks for your friendly feedback. Says more skeptics need wrenches. Just saying. Well, we will definitely do that, Ilya. If it's out of balance, our goal is to have like a roughly equal amount, and so our goal is to have like, as long as they're responsible moderators, not insulting people in the chat, we're happy to have them regardless of their view. So thanks for that feedback, Ilya Moon. Ashketet, thanks for your statement. Question says vestigial organs. I'm not sure who that's for. Do you guys know?
I think it was directed at JL. JL actually said it was vestigial DNA, not true. He was just making the distinction between trash DNA and junk DNA and vestigial DNA.
Gotcha.
Well, what's funny is
Hold
when
on,
it comes
standing.
to
I hate to
the.
do it, but just standing, I've got to.
Well, let me just make one
going.
point real quick.
Hold on. No, this one's even for you. Stupid Horror Energy, thanks for your.
Why doesn't she just debate me live?
She says there's a world of difference between all sequences have function, quote unquote, and some subset of all sequences have function.
Right. So one thing that's good is stupid Horror Energy is putting our kids through college with all these super chats. But oftentimes they'll downplay the function. So for example, ENCODE has revealed that over 80% of our genome is actively transcribed into RNA. Now, we don't know exactly what every single genetic sequence does. That's why we've made testable predictions. They're on print, they're in paper, that based on genetic knockout tests, we will find out in the future. And the thing is, we understand so little of the DNA language. We're discovering more and more every day. But once we do these genetic knockout tests, we'll find out exactly what these sequences are doing. But we do know that there's at least preliminary evidence for over 80% of our genome being active to some extent. So it's fascinating times right now. Good
Well,
question.
and one expansion to that point too, short and pithy. They're also now discovering that the things they thought were non-functional, even through knockout experiments, they're realizing that turns out there's a difference in what actually gets expressed in terms of in vivo versus in vitro experimentation.
Gotcha. And thanks for your question from, let's see. Stupid Horror Energy says, if you spam a genome with a couple million copies of any random DNA sequence, some of them will be functional. For example, if it got dropped in gene regulatory regions, the function response to TEs is a red herring.
So I've never heard of this stupid Horror Energy before, but it's good that she's asking a question. I'm just kidding.
I think
So
she's triggered.
yeah, so like John.
So now
pointed
she's
out-
triggered. I'm triggered. JL Warren's triggered. Everybody's triggered but you, right, John?
Dude, you've been
A lot
obviously
of
triggered.
triggering
buddy.
going on.
You've been obviously triggered all night.
It's been fun.
You ever heard the saying,
So-
it's not me, it's you? Yeah, that's
Dude,
the
who
thing.
is literally dropping F-bombs throughout the entire debate and telling
Do you
people to
think I
shut the F
fucking
up
care
and such?
about a fucking F-bomb? You fucking
That's not
idiot.
my point of
No,
it
I
being
fucking
triggered,
don't.
bro.
Moving.
You can't even
I
calm
thought this
down
question
for
I
was-
speak like this all the fucking time, John. I
reminds
speak
me
like
of
this
question
all
for
the
me.
fucking
We're
time. I do
gonna
apologize,
call out.
SFT.
We're gonna jump in.
Hey,
We'll
I
see.
apologize, SFT.
Oh
Go
no,
ahead.
that's okay. This is fun. This is one to remember. Oh, my kids are up.
We must move quickly.
My son's first word is going to be the F word. Okay, so
I've dropped no F-bombs and you still haven't answered any of my questions. So irregardless.
I feel
And
I've
he's
answered
called,
all
and
your
he said you were
questions.
triggered too, JL.
I'm
And you
triggered.
didn't
Okay,
drop an F-bomb.
let me just
really.
answer this question real quick. So the retrotransposons, even the ALUs, there's a lot of classes of these retrotransposons. I find evolutionists oftentimes point to just the ERBs, but for example, the ALUs, they represent a pervasive and active class of these DNA elements. But guess what? If these weren't all functional, if they really were just all junk, well, then they should be slowly mutating to oblivion. And the fact that we see so many highly conserved regions that are being maintained by selection shows that these really are highly functional, because it would be a significant waste of energy and time for the cell to transcribe and worry about all of these gene sequences and DNA elements. So I think the evidence is strong that the vast portions of our genome are functional. It's not just spurious transcription, if that's what stupid whore energy is hinting at, but that's all I got to say.
James, may I speak on this for just 1 second? It's a
Sure.
positive refutation for that.
Sure, Andy.
Okay, so when you have something that's in the DNA, when you have a sequence that's in the DNA, to remove that sequence, let's say it's a non-functional sequence of the DNA, to remove that sequence requires energy. Okay, it requires energy to continuously, just like it requires energy to integrate new DNA or make changes. It all requires energy. So if the expenditure of energy to get rid of the non-functional DNA exceeds its ability to keep it at a reproductive level, like to keep its reproductive functioning up, whether that be through speed, through genetic mutation, like a physical mutation, whatever the case may be, it's got to take the energy away from somewhere else to remove that DNA. So it becomes more efficient to just leave the non-functioning DNA in, or more energy efficient to leave the non-functioning DNA in than to remove the non-functioning DNA.
Next.
Right. So I would just say that, I guess, since it's my question, do I have last word?
That's
James?
fair, yeah.
So that would assume that they really are non-functional, because that's more of like a philosophy and an explanation for the data that we see. Now, the thing is it actually reasonable? And this is what they'd have to prove to us. Is it reasonable for us to believe that all of these so-called ancient viruses and ancient parasites possess the genetic information necessary to promote so many genetic functions and so many biochemical functions in human beings? I don't think it's reasonable, plausible, or probable. There you go, John.
Next up, keeping moving. Second best Bob, thanks for your statement. Said, I'm really way too stupid to understand most of this, but I'm listening anyway, mostly because I love the people up here. Thanks for your kind words, second best Bob. You are loved. And next up, Smokey Saint, thanks for your super chat. Said, let's see, denying overwhelming evidence of design when you make a career demanding acceptance of evidence for round Earth. Team Skeptic. Let's see, how do I clean this up? I disagree with you. They only called you an idiot, but I still am like, oh gosh.
Oh, you can call me an idiot. I don't care. What was the original question? Because it kind of seemed like a statement more than a question.
You bet. They said denying overwhelming evidence of design when you make a career demanding acceptance of evidence for round Earth.
Well, I would argue that that person's definition of evidence is different than my definition of evidence. My definition of evidence requires something solid behind it, not just a, hey, look, I don't understand how this should work, and I think it should work this way, and here's a bunch of papers that I kind of read through without having a true education or understanding about what they're talking about, and I came to these conclusions, and that's my evidence. Now, I don't mind. People can, I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I'm not a microbiologist. Most of this stuff I've learned over the past couple of weeks in preparation for this debate so that I could be educated for myself. I didn't want to come in here blind and just try to bullshit it because I asked for evidence. The majority of my research went into seeking out pieces of evidence and setting those aside. And I do still have a lot of evidence here. We just never got to the parts where I could present anything that, I mean, like SFT was saying, the chromosome 2, that's a huge part. I like speaking on chromosome 2 more than I like speaking on ERVs, because chromosome 2 really shows a distinct tie to a common ancestor with the gorillas, apes, chimpanzees, and that's why, it's. We could have gone into that. I had more evidence to provide for that, but I didn't see any evidence come from them that was substantiary.
Next up, thanks for your... I don't think I read this from Stupid Whore Energy yet. So she says, let me know if I did read this one. If you spam a genome with a couple million copies of any random DNA sequence...
You read that one.
You read that one.
Oh, that's embarrassing. Okay. Next up, thanks for your...
She has been overloading you, James. It's fair
Yes.
to have gotten confused.
Brian Stevens says, if you want to live in a bubble, block everyone. So for those of you who have been debating, I don't know if you know, but in the live chat, there was a little controversy because I de-wrenched Nathan Thompson, your best friend, Team Skeptic, because, well, we want our mods. We asked them to be friendly, and so it's long story. Nathan started telling everyone that he was going to block them individually from his own accounts.
Hey, SFT, I have a question. Do you have a picture of me in a mankini on your phone?
And a mankini?
Yeah.
No, I don't believe so.
Nathan Thompson does. He keeps a picture of me in my mankini on his phone. I literally think I'm his best friend on those lonely nights when he's sitting in his car trying to go to sleep. I really think that about 95% of those nights he's talking to me. He whips his phone out, looks at me, and is like, "Hey, Team Skeptic, how's it going?"
Very
You guys
nice.
have a love-hate relationship.
You never do know. I mean, next up, thanks for your question from Stupid Whore Energy strikes again. She says, the amniotic egg and hair creates a nested hierarchy that includes primates and rodents/rabbits. This fits genetics, it fits the fossil record, etc. There's nothing like this in your quote-unquote model standing for truth.
That's why I pointed to a number of lines of evidence that can differentiate between the nested hierarchical patterns that we see in the biological world. For example, orphan genes, the DNA function, the molecular clocks in the mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome. Getting into the fossil record, yeah, that'd be a whole separate debate, of course, but we see a lot of stasis. We see a lot of incongruencies in the fossil record as well. And I think the fossil record can be explained best by the flood and a burial by ecosystems, habitats, and communities. So that's exactly what we see. Sea creatures at the bottom and land animals and mammals near the top, and birds as well. So it's not an argument against our position, of course. So John, if you had something to add.
No, that was good.
Short,
Good
sweet.
response.
Thanks so much. Probably my favorite super chat of all. We love Steve McRae, but I can't help but read it. From Steve McRae's manager, basically, I doubt this is his real manager, says, my client would like to debate the definitions of a restraining order and a non-disclosure agreement. Can you make that happen, James? Very provocative. I don't know what's going on with Steve. I know that there's like some sort of controversy, and I think it's always, Steve will always keep you on your toes. We hope he's doing well, and I really mean that. So next, thanks for your question from let me know if I mispronounced this, Hirvensalo. They asked, most important question of the night, why are James and Team Skeptic such sexy beasts? Thank you. Appreciate
Oh my
that.
God. Because we work, don't we, James?
We
work on it.
definitely work.
Hey, you paid
mean
them
it
to
being
say
sexy?
that.
Okay.
It's the only reason I joined him on this thing.
That's fine. I appreciate it. And Kent Hovind CPA, I doubt this is the real Kent Hovind's account, said, if evolution is true, why do we still have Hovins? Oh, come on. Okay, next up. Thanks for
Slip that one by, yeah.
Smoky Saint, thanks for your super chat. Said, Team Skeptic, oh, snap, coming at you. Says, Team Skeptic is an embarrassment to skepticism.
Yeah, they all say that. Anybody that disagrees with me says that. But what they don't understand is like what they think skepticism is just going against whatever the modern fucking the current paradigm is, that I must go against that to be a skeptic. So like right now, I'm a globe earther, right? How can I be a globe earther and still be a skeptic? Because the Earth, the NASA says the Earth is round. So I'm not a skeptic because I believe NASA when they say the Earth is round. However, it's not. Skepticism is about holding a belief until there's evidence to support the belief. I never held a belief on evolution. I probably thought that it was true growing up, but when I got to be an adult and I got to start thinking about it for myself, I've done my own research and looking into it. And from the research that I've done, the scientific papers that I've read, the evidence that I was here to present tonight, it all points towards my skepticism should be on things that go against evolution, not evolution itself. That would just be me being a denialist.
And want to do a quick reminder before we read more questions. All of the speakers are linked in the description, so want to be sure everybody knows that. If you want to hear more of these guys, you can hear more by conveniently clicking those links. And Adam L.
Sub to J.R. Warren. Sorry.
Wait. Oh, I think I've got JL. Oh, yeah, I've got him in there. And JL, or Adam L. Bilia, thanks for your statement, said, standing for truth, I don't agree with you, but I respect you and your conduct. Evolutionists, I agree with you, and I respect you and most of your conduct. John, I don't agree with you. F you and your conduct.
I always find it funny how atheists get so triggered when you actually call them out for their crap, and then the things they're doing to you, and you call and you give them a response. Suddenly, it is it's just horrible behavior. How could anybody ever do this? It's like, oh wow, you can't handle getting what for?
You haven't called atheism out on anything.
Soy boys.
You haven't called atheism out on anything. Sorry.
It's like okay. Next up, thanks for your statement from Tiffany Bear. Says you've got fans out there standing for truth, and John says creation for the win. Next up, D6. Thanks for your question for the creation side. Coming on strong, says you cited a lot of scientific publications in this debate. How many authors agree with your position?
Many of them. I'm gonna have to keep my answers short and sweet because it's getting dinner time and the kids are getting. It's been a couple hours, so many of them is my answer.
I'm so sorry, bro. We're gonna move fast. Bartos Diagos, and if you have to leave and want to have John answer all your questions, I'm sure the audience would love to hear more of John. So, John, I love you, John. Come on. Okay.
Can I make a
John's
point
my
though?
boy.
I don't want to make a rude point about this, but I do want to make a point. When you cite sources that are like creation sources to use in a creation argument, it's kind of like it kind of makes it hard to agree with those sources, to find those sources reputable. If you found sources that were against you or had nothing to do with the argument itself, and you use those sources, like if you used a normal biologist or someone who believes in evolution, let's say, if you were to use his sources against the argument of evolution, that would hold a little bit more credence. But to use creation-based arguments in a creation versus evolution debate is a bit,
Well, do you know how
it just
many?
doesn't.
Well, do you
You
know the
can comprehend how
ratio?
dumb that position
Well, do you know the
was?
ratio of creationist papers versus just secular publications I showed in my opening? Because there were a
Just 'cause
lot of
there's a bunch
secular
doesn't mean it's
publications.
correct.
John, do you not think that creation papers are already going to have a bias towards creationism? Yes or no?
Do you not think that evolutionary paper can have a bias towards
wouldn't.
evolution?
I didn't
However, the point that I
necessarily
was gonna
cite
make is,
evolutionary
are you
papers.
aware
I
of the fact
cited
that
the
there's
presence of
people who are
ERVs. That's
evolutionists
biology.
who are questioning
That's not
evolutionary
evolution.
models? Do you understand that people who are evolutionary biologists and molecular biologists are
Sure,
writing
the
papers
evolutionary
questioning
model?
evolution itself?
Sure,
So
sure.
I'm
The
not really sure
evolutionary.
how
Okay,
how your
in
argument makes any
science,
logical sense.
we have a
People could have
we have a
different
best
perception and
understanding with the
predictions on things.
in
It's like,
science.
oh,
We
I
have
to
a
fo- I have to
best
balance straight
understanding.
to whatever your
Listen,
worldview is.
listen.
Great.
Here's the answer
so
to
are
your
you a
fucking
modern flat
question.
earther? Have you become a modern flat earther?
No, I
Like,
fucking
just
make
because
fun of
you're
idiots
evolutionary
like
flat
you
earther,
and
is that what
them
you are
all the
now?
time.
Okay, cool.
No,
Yeah.
you're a fucking
That's what
you're a
you are, bro.
creationist that is
Hey, let me
essentially a
respond
flat
real
earther.
quick, since it was my question.
All
So
right.
here's the thing. I find evolutionists, they don't know how to read a paper and then come to their own conclusion. They've got that existing assumption at play. So for example, all the pedigree-based studies that I presented from secular sources, the observed mutation rate, okay, the empirical method takes the mitochondrial DNA ancestor just back 6,000 years. Now, when you look at the entire paper, you see the evolutionists questioning it. You know, the authors of the paper, they say, oh, well, you know, this doesn't line up with deep time evolution. Therefore, now they go over a number of methods and a number of ways to calibrate the observed rate with the deep time assumption. So as creationists, we don't need to do that. We're looking at these papers and saying, wow, the empirical rate fits perfectly with our predictions and expectations. Why would we now calibrate it with the deep time evolutionary assumption? That makes zero sense. But evolutionists can't get past their
We must move to
bias.
the next. We must move to
Well-
the next one. We've got many questions, guys. I know that you got a response, and I'm so sorry to cut you off, but also because we're over time. We had a huge influx of questions. I know that you got a round in the chamber ready to fire at Standing for Truth, and I understand the desire to fire so many rounds into his.
Well,
You
you wanna
spent
fight around
longer.
that
You
as
spent
well?
longer explaining that than what I needed to say. But go ahead.
I just want to know why none of those papers are peer reviewed, because they aren't.
They are peer. Every single paper I present.
No, they're not. No, they're not. Because if
Yes,
they're
they
peer
are.
reviewed,
Yes,
they get
are. They're all
refuted.
peer reviewed. They're all
Sorry.
peer
Next
reviewed.
up, parts.
can have a one-on-one debate, too.
Dude, you guys haven't even read them, and you're making assumptions. Wow, don't have any level of
Next
preconceived notions.
Next
Good
up,
Lord.
Go back and
Bartos.
rewatch the debate.
Okay,
and
we
pause when
seriously
I
have to
share
keep
the
moving.
papers.
Bartos,
Okay.
team, if you have a really short, because they just let that run for way longer. Team, if you have a
I'm
short,
good, man.
okay. Bartos Diagos, thanks for your question. Why does God make it so that people in Africa have something against malaria, but have to sacrifice other things? This does not make sense to me. I think they're talking about like on a creation view, like why is it that God allows this
I
protection
think they're
against
questioning
malaria
the sickle cell anemia.
through sickle cell,
And yeah,
but then you have these other deficiencies because of sickle cell. So it's for creationists. It's for you guys.
Do you want that one, SFT? You want me to take it?
You can take it if you want, brother. It's up to you.
I mean, I'll be short and sweet. You finish follow up. One component of all this is there's examples that are the exact same logic in. It's not just it's only people in Africa that have any kind of insert whatever we're talking about here. Now, obviously, in the context of what we've talked about in regards to genetic entropy, which you supposedly who have obviously not read peer-reviewed papers think nobody actually views as happening. JL,
it's not.
It's actually happening.
No, it's not.
Oh, really?
It's,
So you
it's,
think
it's
Fisher's theorem hasn't been
genetic
debunked?
entropy is a bullshit term.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
It
okay.
is.
Well, maybe you should go read some papers from medical researchers.
Would you like me? Would you like me to? Would you like me to pull up the info? Would you like me to?
Year.
I have the information right here that refutes it. It's right in front of me.
You realize Dr. John Sanford just spoke at the NIH, right? The National
Dr. John Sanford is a fucking plant scientist. Okay.
Next up,
I have the information right here in
go
front of
look
me
at
on
his
my screen.
technical publications versus how many technical publications you've got.
Given that,
Error catastrophe has never been observed or documented in nature
listen,
or
just because you don't
experimentally.
understand genetic entropy, that's your problem.
Everybody's
not
passion,
Genetic
but
entropy, genetic entropy is just another bullshit term for error
We'll
catastrophe.
give the last word. We'll give the last word to creation guests, and then we'll move to the next one. I got to give them the last word because I don't want to gang up on them because the super chat was for them. So go ahead, Johnny, and we'll then move on to the next one.
All I gotta say is apparently we have some extremely triggered atheists over here who are going into panic meltdown, even though there's research from medical researchers.
If you address the question for me, just because
I am addressing it. There are plenty of medical researchers that are publishing papers this year talking about this exact subject. So go to Nature Cellular and go do some basic searching, and you'll find out that I'm correct.
Next,
No, you're not.
we have two different ones. We have Mitchell, thanks for your statement, says pond scum to people is a fairy tale. We also have John Rapp, I think this is a response, says creation is a retrofitted fairy tale, pseudoscience.
Yeah.
Next up, thanks for your question from Lily R.O. says the John guy is easily triggered. P.S. James is a 9. Thank you, Lily R.O. I always think Lily R.O. is secretly Earl the postman from Alabama, but I'll take what I can get. So thank you. And John, if you want to respond to that, apparently you're easily triggered.
Apparently so. When I call people out for being assholes, I know it's triggered.
Right.
Yeah, do you ever notice that maybe you call everyone else an asshole? That you're the asshole and everybody else is the good person.
I'm pretty sure if you go back and
bitch.
Stop suffering from amnesia, then maybe you'd recognize that I responded to you being a jerk.
You still provided no evidence for anything that you've claimed.
We have to move to the next one. What is it? Let's see.
My assertion about Team Skeptic is very accurate.
We have to keep the answers constrained to the questions, because otherwise I can't blame other people for wanting to respond to direct insults toward them. So Huge R's, thanks for your question, says, if these guys are supposed to be Christians, then why would anyone ever want to be one? Bad witness, guys. You too, Nathan Thompson. Next, thanks for your super chat question from Nephilim Free, says, secular genetics databases acknowledge that the, quote, fusion site, unquote, codes for polymerase and specifies cell type. The information spans the, quote, unquote, site. LOL in all caps.
Crickets.
Okay, well, Andreas Elda, thanks for your question, says, what's intelligent about giraffe laryngeal nerve?
I don't know what that one is. Is that the super long one? I don't know. Next question.
Next.
I was on mute.
Crickets.
No, go ahead. That's fine. Just if you want to just get through them, go ahead.
Stupid whore energy strikes once again, saying, standing for truth, not sure what you're talking about. Chromosome 2 also has satellite sequences. I think I said, actually, I did read that.
Yeah, you read this one.
Thanks for your super chat. Ilya Moon says, evolution is proven, the Bible is not. Hashtag Hail Sagan 666.
Yeah, evolution is at this point pretty much dead. They're not making any testable predictions in genetics, for example. The ENCODE researchers, these evolutionary scientists at NIH, they ignore the critics that try and hold on to that junk DNA paradigm. Gerar himself said if ENCODE is right, evolution is wrong, and genetic degeneration is real. We accumulate 100 new mutations per person per generation, and JL here has never provided us with the type of selection that can remove so many deleterious mutations. He only provides insults and insults Dr. John Sanford. Those
Are you kidding me? Synergistic epistasis removes that.
Oh, did you Google that? What is synergistic epistasis? Go ahead.
Synergistic epistasis facilitates the purging of deleterious mutations in sexual populations.
Oh, you just read that right.
Okay,
Hey,
no.
literally
In your
see you
earlier
reading that, buddy. Hey, this is coming from the two guys
in
who said
your
they did all
earlier
the
argument,
research in
you
the
just
last 2 weeks.
dismissed that completely.
Oh no, I talked about synergistic epistasis.
No, you threw it out. You said it was
thoroughly
debunked.
falsified. Synergistic epistasis speeds up the degeneration problem. Dan Gerar didn't even mention synergistic epistasis when he was trying to refute ENCODE. He actually resorted to the junk DNA paradigm, so those mutations can be absorbed by the neutral junk. Synergistic epistasis, nobody uses that argument. Humans are not getting better. Face the facts.
Want to quickly remind everybody, in case you want to try to poke him and trigger him, Nathan Thompson is still in the chat. Oh, Nathan, I love you, buddy. Do you remember Team? You met him in person, Team. You guys were like hugging and stuff, and everybody was married.
Oh, fucking shit. I didn't know. Hey, James, let's get it right, okay? All that shit that little kid talked, and then he saw me in Dallas and got scared as fuck from me when we were at the fucking Flat Earth International Conference, and then we went and had that debate, and then after the international conference, he said shit like, next time I see Team Skeptic, I'm just gonna twist him up. What the fuck did he do the entire time? He sat in his chair like a quiet little boy. Good job, Nathan. Good job, Natalie.
Hug. I can't remember. And
no, I didn't hug. Are you kidding me? You know how fucking stinky he looks? Oh my God. You know, if I want to hug Nathan Thompson, I'll go to, if I want to hug Nathan Thompson, I'll go to a fucking anthropological museum and hug a fucking skeleton. Because that dude looks, when people say I look like Skeletor, he looks like my skinny fucking little bitch boy.
No,
people
Nathan,
say that I'm the
you have an enchanting musk, Nathan. Don't take that seriously. Flat Earth, thanks for your message. Says, message for Nathan Thompson. For real, this is a real super chat that coincidentally or not came in right now. And Flat Earth said, message, and this is by right now, it comes up right now on the list. So this was said like probably 20 minutes ago. Said, Nathan, you're a coward and you need help. Sorry, Nathan, I have to read it. Okay, next up, Nad Cubic, thanks for your question. Statement says, disproving evolution is not a positive claim for creation. Team, please school them about positive evidence.
Positive evidence requires positive claim. I mean, positive claims require positive evidence. You got to have something to back what you're saying up other than I don't think that your model is possible. The model of evolution is extremely like has so many variables that apply to it. You got sexual selection, natural selection, artificial selection. You have all these different pressures that are going to influence each individual little jump from DNA, from step to step on the DNA process. And eventually those little jumps will result in such a difference that two species can't.
Yeah. And how do you explain codon syntax shift?
There's the storyboard again.
How do you explain codon syntax frame shift?
Okay, you've asked a question.
In between
Team or JL answer it, and then we have to move on to the next thing.
That's a deflection. You still have
no, it's a direct question that's being asked by researchers, buddy.
No, you still haven't provided evidence for your creator.
Next up,
that's a deflection.
We've given you plenty.
We actually did in our opening statement, which you guys dodged.
Next up, John Rapp says, why did God make old Earth and fossils? No sense. I think it's for you, John.
Okay, that question has a built-in assumption. Why did God make an old Earth and fossils? Fossils require rapid burial. But we can save that for another day.
Next up, Shreeded, thanks for your super chat. Said, stupid whore energy, get on a live stream and debate standing for truth if you're so confident.
Anytime,
Justin Johnson, thanks for your question. Said, message for John, how old is the Earth and how do you know, John?
You know, I don't actually have the exact timestamp. I don't think anybody does, especially given the fact that the evolutionary model ranges, you know, they change it by hundreds of millions of years. So I'm not really sure why that's a direct question, since the other side can't even come close within 100 million years.
Next, John Rapp, thanks for your comment towards Stupid Horror Energy. Says, you rule, good on ya, mate, thumbs up. And N Flat Earth says, sorry creationism, but evolution wins. Okay, so anyway, I mean, I guess that's like probably what they would have sounded
You're
like. If they said it
entertaining,
out loud.
James. I
But
like it.
thank you for all of your questions, folks. We do have to go because we're over time. I'm so sorry about that. We have not gotten to all the questions, but want to say thanks so much, everybody, for being here. And all of our guests are linked in the description, folks. So if you want to hear more, if this is your first time being exposed to them, hey, you can hear more at those links below. Thank you, all four of you gentlemen, for being here with us today.
Thank you, James. It was a blast. One to remember, and I'm glad we had a big audience. That was fun.
It's been a
Live
true
show
pleasure.
kick off on my channel in a couple minutes.
I have to let you know, folks, this is something I mentioned yesterday. So if you're hanging out with us, I have a groundbreaking announcement. If you were with us yesterday, I had mentioned that we were going to have basically a huge political debate coming up. That debate has been confirmed by Destiny this morning. Destiny and Vosh will be taking on Alsop and Eric Stryker on the topic of race and police brutality. That's this coming Tuesday. So that one should be a monster one. We've got a lot of other ones. Like, this week is honestly off the charts with epic debates. We're going to have Erica co-modding on Wednesday. That should be fun, and just many more. So with that, I want to say thanks so much for all of your support. Folks, seriously, I can't give enough credit to the speakers. They're the lifeblood of the channel. This channel doesn't exist if we don't have epic speakers like we had today. We really appreciate them. And also thank you for our mods for always wiping out any hate speech. That's really our only strict rule, with no warnings. And also thanks for all else you do, mods, and just the audience, just for hanging out here. We really appreciate you guys. You make this channel possible and make it fun. So with that, one last goodbye. Thanks so much to our guests, though. Standing for Truth, John, Team, and JL. Thanks for being here, guys.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. I
Thank you,
enjoyed
James.
it.
With that, take care, folks. Have a great rest of your weekend, and keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable.